Chapter 358. Looking at the soul crystal in front of him, Chunshi could not help but put himself in the old man's shoes. If it had been him, he should not be living in this way. It was obvious that the old man could no longer be reborn, so he could only put his yuanying in the soul crystal and then rely on the soul crystal to barely maintain the state of his divine soul. Just like the remnant soul of the azure dragon in the sundial brilliance temple. But what was the point of this? Without a body, the soul crystal was just a cage in disguise. If one could live for 10 or 20 more years, they might feel that they had profited, but if they really stayed in it for hundreds or even thousands of years, it was a little scary just thinking about it. One had to know that although the divine soul could perceive the outside world in the soul crystal, the feeling was completely different from that of ordinary people. It was probably somewhat similar to a sixth sense. For the old man, it was like being in a world of chaos that had not yet been opened. He could not directly see the outside world, but he could clearly perceive any subtle movements in the outside world. Struggling at death's door in the gap between two worlds, the loneliness brought about by drifting away from reality was actually a kind of torture and punishment that ordinary people could not bear at all. Therefore, Chunshi could not help but sigh from the bottom of his heart. This old man was also a ruthless person. Chunshi silently looked at the portrait on the wall. After a long while, he took the lead to break the silence. "Well, I don't have as much time as you, so don't waste time here. Looking at your age, you should know a lot of things. Let's talk. I'm very interested in the matters of ancient cultivators. Why don't we start talking about it?" Chunshi opened the conversation, but the old man did not immediately answer after hearing it, but instead laughed. Although his expression could not be seen, the laughter gave Chunshi a strange feeling. That feeling, it was somewhat like the young man and wise old man who often appeared in jokes. The young man asked the old man to answer his questions, but the old man smiled and did not say anything, but instead put on a posture of having seen through the world of mortals and understood the true meaning of life. In this regard, Chunshi's reaction was completely different from that of the young man in the joke. "Keeping me in suspense, right? All right, take your time. I'm going to kill that guy." As soon as he finished speaking, Chunshi stood up and pretended to leave. His unconventional behavior immediately threw the old man into disarray. He had no choice but to shout anxiously, "Sir, please wait." It's not that this old man is deliberately keeping you in suspense, but it's a long story. "Mister, please take a seat and listen to this old man from the beginning." Hearing this, Chunshi couldn't help but snort coldly. He used his hand to tidy up his clothes and then slowly sat back down. Could it be that Jiang Zhengqing dared to challenge the patriarch in public? Most likely, this old man was backing him up. It seemed like the Jiang clan really had no successors. Otherwise, how could a mere above-heaven tier receive such importance? Chunshi sat in the chair with a cold face. The old man originally wanted to take the opportunity to inquire about Chunshi's background, but he didn't expect Chunshi's style to be so simple and crude, threatening Jiang Zhengqing's life at every turn. The hope of the Jiang clan's revival was all placed on Jiang Zhengqing. Since Chunshi had already displayed such an attitude, the old man naturally didn't dare to change the topic. He could only open his mouth and tell the story. Actually, this matter starts from ancient times. The so-called ancient times actually refer to the time before the Xia dynasty, which was the time before the birth of human civilization. Western scholars did not recognize the existence of the Xia dynasty. On one hand, it was because Westerners had a different understanding of Huaxia culture. On the other hand, it was because archaeologists had not found any written records of the Xia dynasty. If it weren't for the discovery of the Yin ruins in Yuzhou, Western scholars would even doubt the authenticity of the Shang dynasty. Both the Xia dynasty and the ancient Indian civilization appeared more than 4,000 years ago, while the ancient Egyptian civilization and the Sumerian civilization appeared more than 7,000 years ago. However, it had only been 2,000 years since the day Jesus was born, but human civilization had already stepped into the information age from the Iron Age, the Steam Age, and the Electric Age. It wouldn't be long before human beings could truly enter the space age and soar freely in the universe. How many years had it been? And what about Earth? Earth was already 6 billion years old. 460000000. A series of zeros. Wasn't that enough to explain the problem? Therefore, there was no doubt that as early as the ancient times, there were humans on Earth, but they were forced to leave. This was the fundamental reason why humans could still find records of mythical civilizations from ancient books to this day. Earth was a cultivation planet, not a dead planet like Mars. It was the source of life and the beginning of everything. In front of it, immortal cultivators were too insignificant. Tides rose and fell. When the spirit energy of Earth declined, it was like the water of the Pacific Ocean drying up for immortal cultivators. Doomsday came. Fortunately, there was always a way out. Coincidentally, the Taiching divine ancestor appeared out of nowhere and saved everyone from the fire and water with his own strength. Although Chun Shi already knew this information from Bai Hong, he didn't interrupt the old man. Instead, he silently listened to the old man again. However, as he listened, Chun Shi suddenly realized there was a big difference between the old man and Bai Hong's narration. At first, Chun Shi suspected that either of them was lying, but on second thought, he immediately dismissed this speculation. After all, it had been 10,000 years since the ancient times. 3 people's words could become a tiger, let alone these legends passed down by word of mouth. Therefore, Chun Shi didn't think that either of them was lying to him. One lived on Earth, and the other lived in the great world. The two of them were in different positions, so what they saw and heard was naturally different. Bai Hong focused on the great world, but when it came to the old man, he naturally focused on Earth after the ancient immortal cultivators left. So, the Taiching divine ancestor didn't leave with everyone back then, but left some people behind. They either had old grudges with the Taiching divine ancestor or committed some unforgivable sin. In short, they were abandoned by the Taiching divine ancestor, so they were forced to stay on Earth. However, the Taiching divine ancestor was deeply righteous. How could he not understand that the sins of the elders had nothing to do with the juniors? Therefore, the divine ancestor made a promise. As long as the descendants of the sinners could cultivate to the diviner level, they could return to Tiandu through the divine gate. This was the origin of the concept of ascension. In fact, in the beginning, the cultivation environment on Earth wasn't as bad as it was today. Therefore, there were dozens of diviner-level cultivators back then, which led to the legend of the investiture of the gods. Wasn't a good thing for everyone to form a group and ascend? Unfortunately, no one would have thought that the cultivation environment on Earth would deteriorate so quickly. Starting from the Warring States period, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to decrease rapidly, so much so that the divine gate rarely appeared in 100 years. The living environment of immortal cultivators became worse and worse. In the end, they had to hide among the famous mountains and rivers, relying on the weak spiritual energy in the blessed lands to barely maintain their legacies. Thus, the 5 great legacies were born. The immortal cultivators were declining day by day, and there was also the matter of the first emperor burning books and burying scholars. Everything about the ancient immortal cultivators could only regretfully come to an end. Not bad. A very good story. After listening to the old man's detailed narration, Chun Shi couldn't help but praise it again and again. It really gave birth to a feeling of looking through history, magnificent and magnificent. It could be said to be soul-stirring. However, although the story was good, Chun Shi didn't forget the purpose of this trip. Chapter 359. Just as the old man had promised, as long as Chun Shi was willing to spare Jiang Zhengqing's life, he would tell Chun Shi everything he knew. Reality proved that the old man had no intention of deceiving Chun Shi. Perhaps it was out of fear, or perhaps it was because he wanted to form a good relationship with Chun Shi, but the old man told him everything he knew without hesitation. However, what Chun Shi did not expect was, when he mentioned the name Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, the old man suddenly fell silent. Chun Shi waited for a while. When he showed an obvious hint of impatience, the old man's voice slowly sounded from the soul crystal. Arbiter of fate Xian Nu, it has been more than 3,000 years since the Jiang clan stepped foot on Daiyu Island. You are not the first person to ask this question in these 3,000 years, and I believe you will not be the last. The reason why the Jiang clan Xian Nu has a longer lifespan than the Xian Nu of the outside world is because there is no real arbiter of fate Xian Nu in the Jiang clan. Chen Shi could not help but frown slightly when he heard that. There was no Xian Nu? Then what about the woman who stood beside Jiang Yuan Kuei and gave orders? Although Chen Shi did not say anything, the old man seemed to have sensed his thoughts and immediately added, Yuan Qing is indeed the current arbiter of fate Xian Nu of the Jiang clan. She is responsible for presiding over the clan's sacrificial ceremonies, praying for blessings, and other matters. However, compared to your wife, her Xian Nu is just a fake. As soon as he said this, Chen Shi instantly understood what the old man meant. He had long known that the condition to become a Xian Nu was to give up the earthly soul. He had originally thought that the Jiang clan had some secret method to extend the Xian Nu's lifespan, but in the end, he realized that the so-called secret method was to prevent the Xian Nu from giving up the earthly soul. Wasn't the old man talking nonsense with him and wasting his time? The old man's answer made Chen Shi quite dissatisfied, but this was obviously not the time to flare up, so he could only frown and ask, I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. You have to answer me honestly. Xian Nu is a fait accompli. Is there any way to cure her? At this point, Chen Shi couldn't help but promise the old man, You should know how important this matter is to me. If you help me today, I promise, even if I have to go through water and tread on fire in the future, I will definitely return this favor to you. I won't go back on my word. Chen Shi, who never made promises easily, took the initiative to make a promise to the old man at this moment. It was easy to imagine how anxious he was. Although Qin Ruoying only had a slight headache, Chen Shi felt as if he was facing a formidable enemy. In fact, in the end, he was just afraid of losing. After all, he had already separated from Ying once. The husband and wife had gone through different kinds of suffering and torment to finally get to where they were today. The family of three had finally reunited and lived a happy life together. If Qin Ruoying was safe and sound, then it would be fine. But if something happened to her, Chen Shi would never forgive himself. Absolutely not. Of course, these emotions were buried in the deepest part of his heart. Naturally, Chen Shi couldn't easily reveal them. Therefore, after making his promise, he silently waited for the old man's answer. The room was very quiet. It was so quiet that he could even hear the wind outside. The white curtain was gently blown by the wind, just like his heart that couldn't calm down. After an unknown amount of time, the old man's voice rang out again. However, the old man didn't rush to answer Chen Shi's question. Instead, he changed the topic and asked coldly, I can answer your question, but before that, please answer this old man's 3 questions, okay? Although he didn't know what the old man was up to, now was not the time to be anxious. So Chen Shi could only answer patiently. Please go ahead. The first question, Sir, do you know what realm the divine ancestor was at back then? Hearing the old man's question, Chen Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Although he wasn't interested in these unimportant things, since the old man mentioned it, there must be a reason, so he seriously thought about it. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuaning, soul formation, insightful void, doubt, integration, tribulation ascension, Mahayana. Since the divine ancestor was able to find a great world in the void, his cultivation must be at least above the insightful void realm, or even the legendary Tao integration realm. Such a powerful person was definitely a big shot in the heavenly jade world, comparable to the sect master of the divine sect. Thinking of this, even Chen Shi couldn't help but yearn for it. Earth used to be, perhaps it was more prosperous than he had imagined. While Chen Shi was pondering, the old man didn't give him time to think at all, and directly continued to ask the second question, 10,000 years ago, how many cultivators were there in the divine continent? This question really tested Chen Shi. He was an archaeologist. How would he know how many people there were at that time? But then, the old man threw out a third question. The third question, Sir, how do you think the divine ancestor could bring all these people to the great world with his strength alone? At this point, if Chunshi still didn't understand what the old man meant, it could only mean that he was too stupid. Therefore, the moment the old man finished asking the third question, Chunshi suddenly stood up from his chair as if he had been electrocuted, and then couldn't help but exclaim, "The arbiter of fate Xian Nu?" Yes, yes. Sir, you should also know that the arbiter of fate is the mandate of heaven. But how can we cultivators believe in the groundless heaven? The so-called heaven's will, it's the divine ancestor's order to bear the fate of all living beings. Bear the fate of all living beings? When he heard this, Chunshi's expression changed drastically. He could already guess what the old man wanted to say. Although the Taiching divine ancestor was omnipotent, he couldn't bring millions of ancient cultivators to the great world with his strength alone. Therefore, there had to be some secret behind this. And the key to this secret was clearly the arbiter of fate Xian Nu. As expected, the old man quickly confirmed Chunshi's guess. The arbiter of fate Xian Nu. That's a nice title, but to put it bluntly, they're the living sacrifices chosen by the divine ancestor. Everyone says that the divine ancestor has the merit of saving the world, and with his omnipotent power, he turned the tide and saved the world, but they've forgotten the road to the great world. Chapter 360. A Living Sacrifice. The moment he heard these three words, Chunshi understood everything. Even if the grand, pure divine ancestor's cultivation was extremely high, it was impossible for him to forcefully open and stabilize the passage between the two worlds by himself. After all, there were too many people who needed him to save. Not 1,000, not 10,000, but millions and tens of millions. The grand, pure divine ancestor did indeed save the world. But at the same time, this contribution was also stained with the blood of too many innocent people. Not everyone could travel through the void and cross realms as they wished. Therefore, the grand pure divine ancestor could only rely on external forces to allow everyone to go to the great world unharmed. If the sundial brilliance temple was the coordinate between the two worlds, then the soul of Xian Nu was the track to the great world. When the end of the world was approaching, the train led by the grand, pure divine ancestor carried the hopes of the ancient cultivators and rumbled toward the great world full of the unknown. The only place that was not harmonious was probably the railroad track. There were millions of people who needed to be saved. The number of Xian Nu who needed to be sacrificed was also not a small number. One after another, weak and fragile souls. In terms of individual strength, they were not even worth mentioning. They were too weak. A single strand of silk could not make a thread, and a single tree could not make a forest. Under the guidance of the grand, pure divine ancestor, these weak souls of Xian Nu were connected to each other one by one. Like sections of track, they paved all the way from Earth to the great world, forcibly opening up a path of survival for the cultivators in the Age of Doom. How was this a path of survival? It was a nether river full of wrong souls. Because only through the guidance of Xian Nu's soul could the grand, pure divine ancestor use this to stabilize the passage between the two worlds so that those who were not at the soul formation stage could safely pass through the void cracks. Although he had not witnessed this history with his own eyes, Chunshi had a rough understanding of that ancient era. He was even willing to believe this was not a dark past, but a grand epic. In order to continue the legacy of the ancient cultivators, even the weak Xian Nu was willing to sacrifice her life to protect the legacy of the ancient cultivators. Traveling in the wind and rain, passing on the torch. Despite all the hardships, the jade was finally formed. In truth, the sacred ancestor wasn't wrong. With the divine ancestor's cultivation, there was no need for him to care about the lives and deaths of all living beings. Wouldn't it be great for him to live a carefree life in the great world by himself? But he didn't. Instead, he chose to return to Earth and seek a chance of survival for all living beings with his own strength. It was a pity. History had already proven that the founder of every dynasty was great But after that, each generation would be worse than the last. The world only remembered the peerless leader, but forgot about the Simon Xiannu who had sacrificed everything to save them. This was also the reason why Bai Hong knew nothing about Simon Xiannu. No matter what the reason was, the survivors of the Great World had long forgotten the greatness of Simon Xiannu. Back then, the divine ancestor gathered the most precious treasures in the world and refined a total of 13 soul-amassing cauldrons. There is one in each of the 5 places of inheritance, and the other 8 are scattered in the divine land. Now, no one knows where they are. These 13 soul-amassing cauldrons and the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror formed the set of supreme treasures that could save all living beings. Of course, the soul-amassing cauldron was mainly used to collect Xiannu's earthly soul. The heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror was the true core. After Xiannu offered her earthly soul to the soul-amassing cauldron, the divine ancestor held the mirror in his hand and led everyone to the blissful great world in the void. The old man recounted the events of the past. After hearing this, Chun Shi frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Seeing that he didn't intend to speak, the old man paused for a moment before continuing. I'm sure you know that with your wife's current cultivation, she definitely wouldn't have fallen sick if her soul was fine. So I'm guessing this might have something to do with the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror. After all, this treasure was left behind by the divine ancestor. No one knows what secrets are hidden in it. If you want to completely solve this problem, I'm afraid you have to find the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror first. After the old man finished speaking, the room fell silent again. After a long time, Chun Shi seemed to be talking to himself and couldn't help but mutter, "Sky-bearing imitation, fooling mirror, right?" Seeing that his reaction was a little strange, the old man comforted him. For thousands of years, I've seen many similar situations. Many Xiannu wanted to cultivate when they grew up, but because they lacked one of their 3 earthly souls, they could only die with regret. But once they found their earthly soul, they could walk, sit, and lie down. Their spiritual sense was no different from that of ordinary people. Your wife only had a little dizziness and dark vision. It shouldn't be a big deal, so you don't have to worry too much. Not a big deal? Chun Shi wasn't as optimistic about this as the old man. But now wasn't the time to be worrying unnecessarily, so he could only put this problem aside for the time being. He then stood up and said, "All right, since I've said what I needed to say, let's leave it at that for today. I'll remember this favor. In the future, if the Zhang family has anything to ask of me, I won't hesitate to help." Haha, then I'll thank Mr. Chen first. The conversation finally came to an end. Jiang Yuankui had been waiting at the bridge for a long time. When he saw Chun Shi walk out of the room, he immediately went to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. After sneaking a peek at the situation in the room, he finally felt relieved. It seemed like he was really afraid that Chun Shi would hurt the elder ancestor. "All right, you don't have to follow me. Go inside and wait." When Chun Shi saw that Jiang Yuankui wanted to send him off, he waved his hand and rejected him. Then, he walked back the way he came from. When he returned to the shore, the little fellow was still playing with the red-crowned cranes in the pond. These red-crowned cranes were like dolphins. They would rub against her from time to time, which really made the little fellow very happy. If it weren't for Qin Ring's repeated dissuasion, the little fellow even wanted to bring a few of them back. The little fellow was very happy, but Chun Shi's mood didn't seem to be very good. The little fellow had long been trained to observe people's expressions. When she saw that Chun Shi was unhappy, she didn't dawdle anymore. After waving goodbye to the red-crowned cranes, she lay in Chun Shi's arms and obediently got on the boat. Under the gaze of the Zhang family, the yacht slowly sailed away from the dock. At this time, Qin Ruiying gently held Chun Shi's hand and asked softly, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Chun Shi pinched the little fellow's butt and signaled her to sit still. After that, he held Qin Ruiying's hand and went to the bow of the boat. It was late at night. A bright moon hung high above the sea, constantly emitting a cold light. Looking at his lover beside him, Chun Shi couldn't help but ask faintly, "Ying, what kind of person do you think I am?" "Why would you ask that?" "I'm actually a very selfish person." "I don't think so." Qin Ruoying felt that something was wrong with Chen Shi. She imitated the little fellow and put her head on his other shoulder, hoping to make him feel at ease. However, Chen Shi looked as if he was sick. He stared blankly at the bright moon and replied in a daze, "Really, I'm very selfish. For you, I can give up the whole world. All living beings are just ants in my eyes. If one day you're no longer here, I think I might be able to destroy this world and make all the unpleasant things disappear." Chen Shi was still expressing his feelings when Qin Ring suddenly pinched him and said with an unhappy face, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The little fellow didn't understand what they were talking about, but she could clearly feel that her mother was angry. So she imitated Qin Ruoying, raised her head and said in a coquettish voice, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Well, the eldest and the second in the family were furious. Chen Shi had to immediately raise his hands to surrender and apologize. Okay, I'm talking nonsense. Ying, don't be angry. And you, why are you making a fuss? I'm not making a fuss. Hearing this, the little fellow immediately pouted and retorted with dissatisfaction. It's Papa's disobedience that made Mama angry. I'm so obedient. Mama won't be angry with me. Okay, you're the most obedient. Come, let Daddy kiss you. No, I'm angry. After saying that, the little fellow immediately turned her head to the side and refused to let Chen Shi kiss her no matter what. One wanted to kiss, the other wanted to block. Looking at the noisy father and daughter, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile, and then she leaned her head on Chen Shi's shoulder again. In fact, she knew what Chen Shi was worried about. But for her, instead of deliberately preparing for a rainy day, it was better to live in the moment calmly. People often have thousands of thoughts about the future, but they forget to calm down and appreciate the present moment. The future days. Chapter 361. The next morning, under the caress of the morning sun, the yacht slowly sailed into the Zhonghai harbor. Although they were in Zhonghai, the couple had no intention of disturbing Lin Xian. The family of three was like a group of tourists passing by in a hurry. They didn't even stay for long. After accompanying the little one for a meal of KFC at the airport, they got on the plane back home. The only gain from this trip to Zhonghai was, perhaps it was success that put Chen Shi in a bad mood. They really came in high spirits, but returned in disappointment. Obviously, the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror had already gone to the great world with the Tai Ching sage. If he wanted to completely cure Qin Ruoying's dizziness, then he had to go to the great world himself. In this regard, Chen Shi only had 3 words in his mind: F***CKU. He had just returned from the heavenly spiral world after a narrow escape, but now he had to go to a great world like heavenly spiral. Wasn't he just too bored? Regarding this unknown world, Chen Shi had long made up her mind to keep a respectful distance from it. But fortunately, ever since he destroyed the 5 holy palaces, no matter how turbulent the spirit energy tide was, the divine gate didn't appear again. This also indirectly proved that the great world had lost contact with Earth. In fact, whether it was immortal cultivation techniques or modern technology, if one wanted to teleport from one place to another, the coordinates were essential. Without the coordinates, the divine gate would never open again, unless the Tai Ching sage came back and crossed the void to establish new coordinates for the ancient immortal cultivators. And this was also why Chen Shi said he was selfish, because he had also cut off the possibility of celestial ascension. From now on, the 2 worlds would no longer have any communication. The people above couldn't come down, and the people below couldn't go up. You were in your great world, and I was in my global village. Everyone minded their own business. Wasn't that good? Since it was impossible to get the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror, Qin Ruoying's illness could only be temporarily put aside for observation. On the way back, Chen Shi felt that something was wrong the more he thought about it. Previously, he had placed all his attention on Si Ming, Xian Nu, and neglected the old man's strange behavior. Was it really so easy to deal with an old monster that had lived for over 1,000 years? Besides, since the Jiang clan did not have the Siming Xian Nu, how did Daiyu Island become one of the 5 great lands of inheritance? The old man's story should be true, but Chun-Shi had a feeling that the old man was deliberately hiding some important information. However, since he did not plan to go to the great world, he did not need to delve too deeply into these things. Anyway, Daiyu Island was right there. Once Chun-Shi realized that the old monster had lied to him, he could not guarantee that he would do something terrible. After the family of 3 returned to Shangjing, their days were peaceful again. The summer sun shone brightly, and the willows by the lakeside rustled gently. Sightseeing, playing in the water, and flying kites, Hohai had different sceneries throughout the year. Time passed quietly amidst the laughter of the 3 little fellows. In the blink of an eye, the summer vacation was over, and the country welcomed the start of school again. And this little guy had finally ushered in the most important phase of his life. School. To be honest, Nianyan's personality had begun to change under the intentional indulgence of her husband and wife. Although she was still the obedient, sensible, and polite little fellow, she would throw a tantrum from time to time now. She had some traces of a spoiled brat. Of course, Chun-Shi and Qin Ruoying could not be blamed for this. After all, they owed their child too much. Nianyan had been an orphan since she was young. Now that she finally had her parents, shouldn't she throw a tantrum and experience the feeling of being doted on by her parents? Childhood. Happiness was the most important thing. However, a child could throw a tantrum at home, but no one would indulge her outside. Therefore, a few days before school started, Chun-Shi seriously tutored the little fellow and warned her about many things. For example, she had to study hard in school, listen to the teachers, abide by the school rules, and not bully her classmates. Of course, she could not be bullied by her classmates. When Chun-Shi mentioned the last point, before the little fellow had time to nod, the 2 brothers couldn't wait and shouted loudly, "With us here, no one dares to bully her." The younger brother, who had always been straightforward and honest, did not forget to add at this moment, "If anyone bullies you, just tell me. I'll help you beat him up. And me, let's beat him up together." Okay. Yes, the 2 brothers also wanted to go to school with Nianyan. Although it was only senior class, this was the first step in the little fellow's student life. Therefore, even though Chun-Shi had always said that he wanted to let Nianyan live an ordinary life, when it came time to choose, he still listened to his sister-in-law's advice and chose the Donghua Gate Kindergarten, which was located next to the Forbidden City and was known as the best in the country. It was not an exaggeration. If one stood outside and casually threw a brick into the kindergarten, it might hit the grandson of some big boss. One could imagine how deep the background of this kindergarten was. It was said that the children of the rich won at the starting line. From this moment on, the competition had already begun. Donghua Gate Kindergarten was less than 5 kilometers away from Hohai. On the first day of school, there was no way to take the school bus, so she had to personally send the 3 of them to school. Along the way, the 3 little fellows were extremely happy. They carried the same style of cartoon school bag. Nianyan walked in the middle, and the 2 brothers stood on her left and right, like guardians, protecting her at all times. A bus slowly drove over from afar. Chun-Shi did not have any reaction, but the 2 brothers excitedly squeezed Nianyan onto the sidewalk, and then very seriously warned, "Nianyan, when you walk, you have to look at the bus. Look at how big that bus is. If it hits you, you'll be dead. Do you understand?" "Oh." The little fellow nodded blankly. Then, she looked back at Chun-Shi. After seeing Chun-Shi smile and nod at her, she turned her head and began to look at the bus next to her. Everything was too novel. Although she had been to kindergarten before, this seemed to be the first time she went to school. Papa also said that in the future, they would have to take the school bus to and from school. School bus? What was that? Thinking about it, the little fellow could not help but raise her head and look around. On the old streets of Shangjing, the bright sunlight shone on her through the shade of the trees. The surrounding cars and pedestrians seemed to be a little different from usual. Was this going to school? Chun-Shi walked with the 3 children for a while. After confirming the dedicated parking space for the school bus, he took a taxi directly to Donghua Gate Kindergarten. It was only 5 kilometers, so they arrived very quickly. As soon as they got out of the car, Chun-Shi realized that this kindergarten was indeed a little famous. The cars parked in front of the school were not particularly expensive luxury cars, but the license plates all started with Beijing A. It should be known that most of the cars starting with Beijing A8 were leaders of the government, while Beijing AG6 was national level. However, none of the cars with Beijing A license plates were easy to deal with. Even the traffic police had to go around them. At this time, Chunshi suddenly remembered this was Shanjing. Next door was the Forbidden City, and next door was Zongnanhai. Would the security guard let someone like him in by taxi? Of course, this was only Chun-Shi's imagination. After he showed the procedures that his sister-in-law had done for him in advance, the security guard at the door respectfully welcomed him in. How sensitive were Chun-Shi's ears? Therefore, as soon as he entered the school, he found that these parents basically knew each other. Everyone even greeted each other. Since the parents knew each other, the children were naturally childhood sweethearts as well. Seeing this, Chun-Shi frowned slightly. These children. Chapter 362. The children of the courtyard could also be considered a characteristic of Huaxia. In the past, the units had to allocate houses, and everyone in the unit lived together. Everyone saw each other all day long, and their children would naturally play together since they were young. They were the so-called childhood sweethearts. Of course, it would be fine if it was an ordinary unit. The children of the courtyard that people talked about were mostly the children of high-ranking cadres. Their parents either held important positions in various ministries or were cadres above the regimental level. These children grew up together since they were young. There is a clear distinction between who could play with whom and who could oppose whom. In addition, because they had seen a lot since they were young, the children of the courtyard were usually more mature. In this regard, Chun-Shi had to hesitate. If he put Nian among these children, for her growth, was it good or bad? However, after thinking about it, Chun-Shi still felt relieved. After all, these children had received different education since they were young, and there were more restrictions in various aspects. If he really wanted to compare, it might be easier to get along with them than children from ordinary families. In short, he would give a try first. If Nian was unhappy, he would find another place for her. While thinking, Chun-Shi led the 3 children into the school. Today was the registration day. The main purpose was to help the children adapt to the environment of the kindergarten. It was not official enrollment yet. Therefore, after Chun-Shi filled in the form, he led the 3 children to the classroom under the guidance of the teacher. Since the school was so famous, there must be some skills in the background. Chun-Shi glanced casually and found that there seemed to be more teachers in the school than there were parents. There were main class teachers, assistant class teachers, auxiliary class teachers, life teachers, care and health teachers. There was everything. Along the way, regardless of whether they knew each other, the teachers were very kind and greeted the 3 children. Those who did not know would think that they were eating Hadaleo. Under the guidance of the teacher, they quickly arrived at the big classroom. The 3 children did not go to the middle class, but came directly to the big class. Such unfamiliar faces naturally attracted the attention of the other parents. Other families usually had one person dragging one person, but Chun-Shi was dragging 3 people. In addition, he was a new face, so everyone couldn't help but whisper to each other. "Old Lee, have you seen this person before? It looks like a new face. He didn't even come to the parent-teacher meeting yesterday. Didn't you see the enrollment list before? Which unit is he from?" Ah, now that you mention it, I remember that there were originally only 60 spots for this semester. However, a few days before the start of the semester, 3 spots were forcefully inserted. They didn't even attend the interview and just waited to report. You didn't even attend the interview? So powerful. Isn't that so? When I brought the child here, I didn't even pass the interview. If it weren't for my uncle, I reckon it would have been over. We begged and begged, and it wasn't easy for us to get spot. Yet, he casually dragged in 3 people. This is shoo. You know, after a brief discussion, the 2 parents glanced at each other in tacit understanding. They immediately came up with a plan. There were many small tables in the classroom. 3 to 5 parents gathered around a table with their children. However, similar discussions were constantly taking place at each table. Why do parents nowadays like to let their children go to good schools? Grades were only one of the reasons. The most important thing was a good school could build better connections for the children, and the importance of these connections could not be compared with a few simple numbers on the report card. Classmate relationships. Only 10 or 20 years later, when everyone had stepped into society, would they deeply realize how valuable this word was. Although everyone was whispering, Chunshi pretended not to hear them. As soon as he entered the classroom, he took the 3 children and sat down according to their nameplates. The children in the kindergarten were still young. Naturally, it was impossible for the children to go on stage and introduce themselves as soon as they entered the classroom. Therefore, they could only wait for the children to adapt before the teachers arranged for them to begin the self-introduction. There were many delicate little toys on the table. As soon as they sat down, the 3 children were attracted by these toys. The teachers were indeed very attentive. They even prepared an exclusive gift bag for each child. The little girl was still very familiar with her name. Therefore, she immediately grabbed the gift box with the words Chunyin written on it and couldn't wait to open it. Inside was a children's picture book that could be used in both Chinese and English. At the same time, there were many exquisite puzzle toys. Therefore, the 3 children immediately gathered together to play like they did in the tea house. There were already 2 children sitting at this table. Seeing that they were so lively, the 2 children went over to play with them. Perhaps because she had stayed in the tea house for a long time, Yin Yin usually played with unfamiliar children. Therefore, she did not hesitate. With a wave of her small hand, she very generously invited the 2 children. It was fun with more people. Since the children were playing together, the adults naturally took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. "Bro, are you a Dragon Phoenix triplet?" The one who spoke was a bespectacled man about the same age as Chunshi. Although the bespectacled man wore casual clothes and spoke casually, he exuded a strong aura. However, he exuded a strong sense of self-confidence. And this kind of self-confidence did not make people feel disgusted. It was as if he was supposed to be like this. After hearing the bespectacled man's words, Chunshi responded with a smile, "No, they're the children of friends. The 2 families are close to each other. They help each other out when they have time." Oh, so that's the case. The bespectacled man did not seem to expect that there would be parents who did not bring their children to the registration day, so he was stunned on the spot. At this time, the middle-aged man next to him, who had not spoken, suddenly reached out his hand to Chunshi and said, "Hello, my name is Wang Junqing. This is our child, Hani." Seeing this, Chunshi had to politely shake hands with him and then respond, "Hello, my name is Chunshi." Chunshi? Wang Junqing murmured the name, but found that he had no impression of this name at all. So he turned to look at the bespectacled man. Seeing this, the bespectacled man seemed to have received some instructions. The smile on his face suddenly became a lot more enthusiastic. Almost instantly, he reached out his right hand to Chunshi. "Hello, Brother Chun. My name is Zhao Ziyu." Speaking of this, Zhao Ziyu deliberately paused and then seemed to casually add, "I live in the planning commission courtyard like Brother Wang, so the children of our 2 families are very familiar with each other since young. Generally, we don't play with other children. I didn't expect to get together with your child so quickly today. It seems that they really hit it off. He's just a kid. He can play with anyone." The bespectacled man's words had a deeper meaning, but Chunshi did not seem to understand. After responding lightly, he did not speak anymore. One must know that the courtyard was also divided into different grades. The Planning Commission courtyard was the highest grade courtyard in the entire Huaxia. It was not because of external factors such as geography, environment, living conditions, etc., but because a total of more than 200 top bosses walked out of this courtyard. Any one of them was enough to make Huaxia tremble. The reason why the bespectacled man deliberately revealed to Chunshi was that he really could not understand Chunshi's background, so he wanted to show his cards. If Chunshi's identity was at this level, then everyone could talk happily. If he couldn't reach it, "There are so many seats, please change to another one." In fact, the courtyard was a circle. Chapter 363. After the bespectacled man explained everything to Chunshi, He couldn't help but put on a haughty look. He was confident, but he didn't know that this confidence was meaningless in front of Chen Shi. Therefore, after Chen Shi chuckled a few times, he acted as if he didn't understand the bespectacled man's words and turned to talk to Wang Junqing about the child. In this spacious and warm classroom, he wasn't a god, nor was he Mr. Chen. He was just a child's father. Seeing that Chen Shi didn't play by the rules, Wang Junqing couldn't figure him out for a while. However, he didn't neglect Chen Shi because of this. Since he didn't want to talk, then he couldn't blame him for investigating on his own. Therefore, after giving the bespectacled man a look, Wang Junqing followed the topic and started chatting with Chen Shi. If you ignored the content of their conversation, the atmosphere was similar to a business gathering. Just a few glasses of wine, and there would be a harmonious atmosphere of drinking and chatting. Perhaps it was because they were accompanied by their parents. The children quickly adapted to the classroom environment, and then they began to play freely. A few of them were lively and started to clamor about going outside to play on the slide. Seeing that the atmosphere was lively enough, the teacher came to the center of the classroom and kindly asked the children to stand up one by one. Then, she guided them to start introducing themselves. It was the little girl's first time facing such a situation, so she was naturally a little embarrassed when it was her turn. Under Chen Shi's constant encouragement, the little girl finally mustered up the courage to stand up and say timidly, My name is Chun Yin. I'm 5 years old this year." It was just a few simple words, but she stuttered as if she was stuttering. After saying that, the little girl immediately shut her mouth and stood there timidly, not knowing what to do. "Very good. From today onwards, Chun Yin is a member of our big family. Come, let's welcome her together. Welcome the new student." After saying that, the teacher took the lead and applauded. When the children saw this, they followed the teacher's example and clapped while shouting, "Welcome the new student." Speaking of which, this was the first time in Yin Yin's life that she had officially integrated into a group. That strange feeling immediately made her feel a little overwhelmed, so she could only lower her head and constantly tug at the corner of her clothes with her hands. That shy and bashful look on her face was extremely adorable. After Chen Shi pulled her back to her seat, the little thing slowly opened her eyes again. Then she carefully listened to each student's self-introduction, and under the guidance of the teacher, she kept applauding. It looked like she was trying to integrate herself into this new group. The little girl was already so nervous, not to mention the brothers. Of course, when it was Wenwen's self-introduction, he actually said, My name is Xia Ming." When he heard this, he corrected him, "Xia, don't believe him. He's Xiaoan. Xia Ming." "You, my Xia," the older brother instinctively retorted. Then, as if he suddenly came back to his senses, he couldn't help but mumble weakly, No, I'm Xiaoan, he's Xia Ming." The twins were extremely eye-catching wherever they went. When the two brothers made such a scene, all the parents present were immediately amused and laughed. The other children looked at them in confusion. They really didn't understand what was going on. How could two people in this world look exactly the same? Everyone looked at the brothers curiously. The differences in the brothers' personalities were completely on display here. The older brother, who had always been shrewd and never let himself be taken advantage of, was now blushing like a monkey's butt. The younger brother, who had always been simple and honest, was not at all timid in the face of everyone's stares. Instead, he was complaining that his older brother was using his identity. The two brothers were like two pistachios, immediately making everyone laugh out loud. Just like that, Chen Shi led the three children into the capital city's second-generation circle, and the curtains slowly began on the three children's school days. After all, kindergarten life was quite relaxing. Perhaps because of the brothers' company, the little girl didn't cry from beginning to end. Sometimes, she even took the initiative to say that she wanted to go to kindergarten. Chen Shi said that the little girl would take the school bus by herself, but when it was time to go to school, he still personally picked her up and sent her to school every day. At the same time, he also instructed Big Cat to wait outside the kindergarten gate at all times. From this, it could be seen that he really cared for Yin Yin to the extreme. When life was on the right track, time seemed to pass much faster. In the blink of an eye, it was National Day again. It was cold in the north, and at this time, people all wrapped up their jackets. There was no military parade this year, so naturally, there were fewer tourists in Shangjing than in previous years. It was still the large courtyard, but compared to the desolation of previous years, the Qin family's courtyard was particularly lively this year. Early in the morning, Gu Lao took the brothers to the courtyard. Xiao Yuan was busy moving out all the tables and chairs in the house, while her sister-in-law and Qin Yongyan sat in the main hall to discuss their own understanding. Even Qin Ruoying, who hadn't shown up for a long time, today, she finally got Chunxi's permission to make an exception and take a day off. In fact, since the family of three returned from Daiyu Island, Qin Ruoying became the one who worked the hardest. She was cultivating in seclusion almost all the time. Her sister-in-law's dizziness wasn't very obvious because she had already stepped into the celestial being realm. Therefore, Chun-Shi came to a conclusion. This symptom might be effectively suppressed with the improvement of her cultivation base. In this case, he naturally had to urge Qin Ruoying to cultivate diligently at all times. After all, he had already destroyed the Sundial Brilliance Temple. Without the blessing of 8 times the time difference, Qin Ruoying could only rely on her own efforts. Unfortunately, her talent wasn't good, so she could only work harder than ordinary people. And this was the fundamental reason why Qin Ruoying had been living in seclusion recently. Today's weather was good. The chill of early autumn was swept away by the warm sunshine. The autumn air was refreshing, and the clouds were light and the wind was light. Everything was so tranquil, just like Chun-Shi's mood at the moment. The couple stood side by side on the steps of the West Wing, looking at the 3 lively and cute little guys. The corners of their mouths couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. However, life was like a train. After arriving at this station, there was still the next station. She wasn't even ready to welcome the next station when the train suddenly stopped here. In just a moment, the figures of his sister-in-law and Qin Yongyan suddenly appeared on the steps outside the main hall, and Chun-Shi immediately held Qin Ruoying's hand. In addition to the 3 children who were still fooling around, even Gu Lao and Xiao Yuan noticed the strangeness and couldn't help but immediately look up at the sky. They saw that the sky that was still bright and beautiful just a moment ago had been shrouded by large dark clouds in the blink of an eye. It was clearly 10 o'clock in the morning, but the sky was gloomy as if night had fallen. The speed of change was simply puzzling. Why did the weather suddenly change? Gu Lao looked at the sky in surprise and immediately stood up. Then he quickly said to Xiao Yuan, "It looks like it's going to rain. Quick, let's put away the tables and chairs." However, as soon as Gu Lao's voice fell, bean-sized raindrops suddenly fell from the sky. Like a summer shower, the dense raindrops continued to fall from the sky. Almost instantly, Gu Lao and Xiao Yuan became drowned rats. And at this moment, Chun-Shi, who was standing on the steps, suddenly reached his hand into the rain and then opened his palm, allowing the raindrops to constantly hit his palm. Feeling the surging spiritual energy contained in the rain, Chun-Shi's brows almost instantly twisted into the shape of the Chinese character Sichuan. What kind of shower was this? This was simply an unprecedented tide of spiritual energy liquefied, benefiting the common people. This was Chapter 364. Rain moistens all things and nourishes the common people. In this bleak and cold late autumn, a sudden downpour instantly extinguished everyone's rising spirits because of the National Day holiday. Heavy rain was always accompanied by strong winds, and this was the north. When a heavy rain came down, it immediately drenched people from top to bottom. On the streets of the capital, people hid under the eaves and shivered. Everyone was hoping that the rain would stop, but they didn't know that. This rain, it was actually a blessing bestowed by God to all things. From the moment the rain started to fall, the big cat was like a clockwork doll that had been activated, running wildly in the rain. Big Head, who had always been trapped in the fish tank and couldn't go anywhere, jumped out of the fish tank like a fish leaping through the dragon gate. Then, through his own hard struggle, he finally jumped into the heavy rain. For most children, being in the rain was always a very fun thing to do, and the three little guys were no exception. At first, the brothers were a little restrained because Gu Lao was present. However, Nian looked back at Chun-Shi and found that her parents' attention was on the sky. She rushed into the heavy rain and then jumped around the yard with the big cat. She stepped on the water in the yard like a Peppa Pig who liked to step on mud. Her little face was full of excited smiles. The rain drenched her hair, and the line of water almost blurred her eyes, but this made her even happier. Under the constant urging of the little guy, the brothers finally couldn't resist the temptation. The two glanced at Gu Lao, who had just rushed up the steps to hide from the rain, and then jumped into the heavy rain like a wisp of smoke. In the heavy rain in the yard, the three little guys laughed happily. At this time, Gu Lao suddenly came back to his senses. But when he was about to scold the brothers, Chun-Shi's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Let them play for a while. A little rain won't be a problem. There's heating at home. If it's cold, they'll know to come back. Seeing how happy the three children were, coupled with Chun-Shi's persuasion, Gu Lao's lips moved a few times, but in the end, he didn't interrupt them. The heavy rain poured down, washing away the hustle and bustle of the entire city. It was as if the only sound left in the world was the sound of the rain. It was a feast and a carnival. Under Chun-Shi's signal, Qin Ruoying also walked into the heavy rain step by step. Shangjing rarely rained, so there was a lot of dust and impurities accumulated in the clouds. When it landed on one's body, there was a sticky feeling. But today's rain was different. Although it was a little cold, the rainwater was exceptionally clear and pure, giving people a comfortable feeling all over their bodies. Spiritual energy turned into rain. Even for Chun-Shi, this was the first time he had seen such a situation. For a moment, he couldn't help but walk into the rain and began to wantonly plunder the spiritual energy. Rain after a long drought is truly a blessing in life. However, just when everyone was celebrating because of the rain, Qin Ruoying suddenly felt her legs go soft, and she staggered. If Chun-Shi hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen into the puddles on the ground. Ying, what's wrong? My head is a little dizzy. Qin Ruoying covered her forehead. Her originally rosy face was stained with a layer of white frost, looking as if she was sick. At this time, Qin Shueqing also seemed to feel something and couldn't help but blurt out to Chun-Shi, "It's here again, that feeling." After saying that, even she covered her forehead with a look of discomfort. Qin Shueqing was already a celestial, but even she was so uncomfortable, one could imagine what kind of experience Qin Ruoying was experiencing at this moment. Chun-Shi nervously supported Qin Ruoying, and at the same time constantly poured his true essence into her, trying to ease her symptoms. Why? Why did she feel dizzy? Chun-Shi seriously considered all the possibilities. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Chun-Shi's mind. It wasn't the first time Qin Ruoying felt dizzy. Whenever this happened, it must be when the tide of spiritual energy was surging. Was it because of the tide of spiritual energy? It obviously wasn't. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was always the most important thing to cultivators. So how could it cause discomfort? Since natural factors were ruled out, only man-made factors were left. In addition to the information he had obtained on Daiyu Island, Chun-Shi could almost conclude that this definitely had something to do with the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror. If he guessed correctly, such a huge tide of spiritual energy had appeared on Earth, so the people behind the Divine Gate wanted to use it to open the Divine Gate. But because he had already destroyed the 5 holy temples, the Divine Gate hadn't been opened. The Divine Gate, the holy temples, the tide of spiritual energy, Si Ming Xian Nu, the sky-bearing technique, and the floating dawn mirror, everything was actually closely related. Just as Chun-Shi was pondering the root of the problem, Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly seen something. She looked up at the sky and muttered, I see it. There are people in the sky. They want to come down." As soon as she finished speaking, her body went limp and she completely fainted. Ying. The sudden change really shocked Chun-Shi. He almost instantly carried Qin Ruoying back to the West Wing. Looking at the unconscious Qin Ruoying lying on the bed, Chunxi's mood fell to the bottom. At this moment, Qin Shiueqing also rushed into the West Wing. Then, she said to Chunxi with a pained expression, "I saw someone holding a mirror," and then he kept talking to the mirror. I could hear his voice, but I couldn't hear what he was saying at all. Qin Shiueqing's expression was very pained. She looked like she was drunk, and she was trembling as she walked. Mirror? Chunxi repeated this word. When he was about to ask, Qin Shiueqing shook her head and muttered, "I can't, my head is so dizzy. Let me sleep for a while." After saying that, she fell on the bed and lay side by side with Qin Ruoying. Looking at the two sisters who had fainted on the bed, Chunxi was silent. He carefully checked the physical condition of the two and found that their physiological functions were all normal. There were no signs of disorder in the vital essence in their bodies. It was as if they were sleeping peacefully. After a long while, when Chunxi was sure that the two of them were not in any danger, he gently kissed Qin Ruoying's forehead. Then, he got up and walked out of the West Wing. It was still raining heavily outside. The three little guys were still jumping excitedly in the rain. She subconsciously glanced in the direction of the main hall, but just happened to meet Qin Yongyan's gaze. Obviously, his father-in-law also noticed something strange, but due to his limited ability, he could only put all his hopes on Chunxi. Chunxi nodded slightly at Qin Yongyan. Then, Chapter 365. Above the sky, amidst the dark clouds, Chunxi silently sensed all the tiny movements around him. A massive spirit energy tide that he had never seen or heard of before was surging wantonly in front of his eyes. It was only at this moment that Chunxi suddenly realized the area covered by this rain was too large. If one stood on the moon and looked at the earth, they could clearly see the entire northeastern hemisphere was shrouded in huge cloud cyclones one after another. From the Malay archipelago in the south to Siberia in the north, almost half of Asia was covered by these huge cloud cyclones. The center of each cyclone was the place with the densest spirit energy. At a rough count, there were at least 7 or 8 cyclones. There was one in Shangjing, one in Qinling, one in Donghai, one in Karakoram, one in Taklamakan. Everywhere that had appeared before, a spirit energy tide appeared at the same time today. In other words, if the divine gate suddenly opened, it would definitely appear in these places. Usually, it would come one by one, but today, so many appeared at the same time. What was the secret behind it? Chunxi didn't know, and he was too lazy to think about it, because at this moment, there was only one thought left in his mind, and that was completely block the divine gate. For Yinging, for Ninian, for their family of 3 to live a happy and stable life. Since opening the divine gate required a huge amount of spirit energy, then he wanted the spirit energy tide to never appear. From now on, he would be the dragon-breaking stone that stood between the two worlds. Wherever the spirit energy tide appeared, he would definitely be there. He wanted to completely cut off any connection between the two worlds. Disperse. This rain was not accompanied by lightning or thunder, but after Chunxi roared at the sky, a series of deafening rolling thunder suddenly sounded in the sky. Boom! In an instant, the sky was like an army of thousands of soldiers and horses facing the enemy. The sound of drums was endless and rumbling. With Chunxi as the center, a cyclone began to expand rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Because it was spinning too fast, there were even white stripes visible to the naked eye on the inner wall of the cyclone. These stripes were like sharp blades, forming a meat grinder, enough to tear anything caught in the cyclone into pieces. The sky wailed, and the dark clouds roared in anger. Accompanied by the incessant flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder, Chunxi was like a black hole, pulling in all the clouds and cyclones in the world and sucking them in bit by bit. This was the true power of the divine transformation stage. When Chunxi went all out, he could affect every corner of this planet. At this moment, he was like a Taotai from ancient times. He opened his mouth and crazily devoured the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on earth. Because only in this way could he immediately calm down the raging tide of spiritual energy. Unfortunately, Chun-Shi had overestimated himself. After all, Earth was no longer the dead planet of the last days that didn't even have a celestial being. After tens of thousands of years of silence, this decaying cultivation planet finally glowed with new vitality. The tide of spiritual energy was the beginning of everything. This was not something that Chun-Shi could stop by himself. Under the wheels of the Great Era, he was like a mantis that stretched out its arms to stop the car from moving forward. Even if he had to die, he would not hesitate. Ah! After Chun-Shi let out a long roar, a huge figure suddenly appeared behind him. It was the Dharma form. It looked just like him, but its body was more than 20 meters tall. It stood proudly in the sky like a god. Surging spiritual energy continued to surge into his body. Chun-Shi was like a balloon that was constantly inflating. There would be a time when he could not bear it anymore. Therefore, he urgently needed a channel to vent. This world, unsurprisingly, it became the channel for him to vent. In the blink of an eye, countless sword lights shot out, targeting the center of the cyclones one after another. Boom! Boom! Wherever the sword auras went, there would be a thunderous explosion in the air. For a moment, more than half of Asia was filled with earth-shattering thunder. Boom! Boom! The sword auras covered 30,000 miles, and one sword aura chilled 19 continents. If the heavens were in my way, I would smash the heavens. If the earth was in my way, I would flatten the earth. Chun-Shi crazily grasped the spiritual energy of heaven and earth while constantly detonating the center of the cyclones with the sword auras, trying to stop the tide from surging at the root. A big ship sank because of a small hole. 100-feet dike collapsed because of an ant's nest. The method Chun-Shi used seemed violent, but in fact, it was simple and effective. After his desperate series of attacks, the surging tide of spiritual energy was forcibly contained by him. The tide gradually receded, and the clouds and cyclones dissipated one by one. The dark clouds in the sky also dispersed, and the warm sun shone on the earth again. At this time, Chun-Shi's pale face showed a smile with difficulty. It was finally calm. However, just as Chun-Shi dragged his tired body and was about to return to Shangjing, a voice full of anger suddenly rang in his ears. "It's you. How dare you destroy the sacred ancestors' foundation? You're blocking my way to Tiandu. Hateful, hateful, hateful." This person's tone was filled with incomparable resentment, as if he had a grudge against Chun-Shi for killing his father and stealing his wife. In the 3 hateful words in a row, there was an undisguised killing intent. This enmity was absolutely irreconcilable. After hearing this voice, Chun-Shi was a little confused for a moment. Because this voice came out of nowhere, intermittent, and sounded a little strange, as if a voice changer was turned on, causing the voice to be distorted. However, Chun-Shi still understood this person's words. In this regard, Chun-Shi was unexpectedly mischievous. He imitated Feng Tangjing in the 9th grade Sesame official and shouted towards the sky with a cheeky face. Not satisfied? "Come and hit me. Come and hit me." As he spoke, he twisted and turned in the air proudly. In fact, Chun-Shi wasn't sure if the other party could hear his ridicule. Since the other party couldn't pass through the void and directly press him to the ground and beat him up, then this person definitely couldn't be the Tai Ching sacred ancestor. This person's cultivation was probably about the same as his, but the other party had touched the threshold of the word void, so he could directly talk to him from the great world. "You little thief, I'm so angry. Today, I swear that when the generals of Tiandu return, it will be the time to tear you into pieces. Remember this?" Hearing this, Chun-Shi laughed disdainfully. Immediately after, he acted out of character and directly raised his middle finger towards the sky. At the same time, he didn't forget to ridicule. "Remember this, my ass." Obviously, that person was so angry that he couldn't speak, so he could only let out a roar of anger and helplessness. However, at this moment, the last cloud cyclone completely dissipated. The tide of spirit chi receded. That person's voice stopped abruptly, as if it had never appeared. Everything returned to silence. Chenshi immediately withdrew the smile on his face. Chapter 366. This sudden thunderstorm also cooled down the excitement of a National Day celebration. As soon as Chenshi stepped through the Chihuahua gate, the little fellow, who was playing hide-and-seek with the two brothers in the yard, focused on him. Then, the little thing's eyes immediately lit up. "Papa, where did you go?" As she spoke, she ran excitedly to Chenshi. The cute way she ran looked like a puppy at home. When she saw her owner come back, she would enthusiastically rush up and wag her tail. Of course, Nian was not a puppy. She was the most precious treasure in the world. Papa just went out because he had something to do. "How was it? Did you have fun?" "Yes. I like the rain. It's fun." "What's fun?" "Look at your clothes. They're soaking wet. Don't you feel cold?" Hearing this, the little thing immediately shook her head like a rattle drum, and then said with certainty, "Not cold." "You're really not cold?" "Not cold." Looking at the little fellow's resolute look, it seemed that she really did not feel cold. However, as soon as the little fellow's voice fell, a cold wind suddenly blew over from nowhere. Her clothes were already a little wet, and after being blown by the cold wind, she could not help but shiver. Well, now she knew it was cold. The little fellow subconsciously pressed her body close to Chenshi's chest, and then could not help but whisper, "It seems a little cold. It's good that you know it's cold. Don't play outside for too long when it rains, or the cold air will get into your body and make you sick. If you get sick, you have to take very bitter medicine. Do you understand?" Understood. The little fellow had not taken medicine for a long time. But when Chenshi mentioned the word medicine, she immediately recalled the bitter feeling, and her little nose wrinkled. "Let's go take a shower and change clothes." After the purpose of educating was achieved, Chenshi held the little fellow and called the two brothers to follow him into the West Wing. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Qin Ruiying and Qin Xueqing lying on the bed, so she immediately warned them in a low voice, "Shh, Mama is sleeping. Don't disturb her." "All right." The two brothers nodded in unison, then tiptoed into the bathroom. After all, Nian was a girl. Chenshi naturally couldn't let her take a bath with the two brothers, so he had to wash the two brothers first before it was the little fellow's turn. Although Chenshi's mood wasn't very good at the moment, but when facing the three children, he still showed enough patience. Even though the two brothers were very naughty when they were bathing, Chenshi did not vent his anger on them. Children were always carefree. No matter what the situation was, happiness would always be the first thing in their hearts. Therefore, more than half an hour had passed by the time Chenshi helped the three little fellows wash up, and their clothes were dried by Chenshi with Chenshi. "Okay, go out and play. Wait, what do you want to eat tonight? Dad will make it for you later." "Braised pork ribs." After casually throwing out such a sentence, the little fellow hurriedly ran out of the West Wing. "Okay, got it." After Chenshi responded with a smile, he slowly walked to Qin Ruiying's side. Looking at his lover lying quietly on the bed, Chenshi couldn't help but gently leave a kiss on her forehead. After a kiss, the sister-in-law next to him suddenly made a soft moan, as if she had a nightmare. Chenshi was about to reach out to check the situation, but Qin Xueqing jumped up from the bed like a frightened cheetah and then kicked Chenshi's head. "Stop, it's me." In front of Chenshi, the sister-in-law would never have any possibility of resistance. He just casually glared at Qin Xueqing, and Qin Xueqing suddenly fell on the bed like a robot without power. "Let's talk. What did you see before you fainted?" The sister-in-law was a celestial being, and her foundation was much thicker than Qin Ruiying's, so the information she provided was naturally more useful. After Qin Xueqing was pressed on the bed by Chenshi, she was completely awake. The sister-in-law twisted her body and found that she couldn't move, so she couldn't help but blush and scold Chenshi, "Hey, let go of me." But this tone, why does it sound a little strange? "Get up. Do you want to drink water?" "No." Qin Xueqing seemed to dislike the feeling of being controlled by Chenshi, so her attitude wasn't very good after she got up. But when she saw Qin Ruiying, the expression on her face slightly stiffened. Then Qin Shueqing quickly shifted her gaze to the window, and then said, I saw a lot of people. Those people seemed to be walking on clouds and flying in the sky, and they were wearing very strange clothes, a bit like ancient people. Behind them was a very, very big palace, even bigger than the Forbidden City. They were all looking at me. Maybe they weren't looking at me. Anyway, from my point of view, they were looking at me. I saw the hostility in their eyes and the murderous intent. I don't know how to describe that feeling to you. At that moment, I felt like Sun Wukong, who wreaked havoc in heaven, standing outside the southern heavenly gate, facing the gods and Buddhas in the sky alone. Qin Shueqing frowned. Try hard to recall the scene she saw at that time. When Shunshi heard this last sentence, the corner of his mouth suddenly hooked up into a shallow arc. They weren't looking at you. They were looking at me. Looking at you? Why would they look at you? After hearing Chun Shi's words, Qin Shueqing shifted her gaze to him. She was really confused now and really didn't understand the situation. Why did she suddenly faint? The people she saw in the dream, who exactly were they? His sister-in-law was confused, but Chun-Shi had no intention of explaining. He leaned over and touched Qin Ruoying's cheek, then immediately got up and walked straight out of the door. I'm going out first. If she wakes up early, remember to tell her I'll be back soon. Qin Shueqing felt that something was wrong with Chun-Shi and suddenly couldn't help but blurt out, Wait, where are you going? Chun-Shi stopped in his tracks. Qin Shueqing looked at him and then added in a slight panic, You didn't even tell me where you were going. How can I tell my sister where you're going? Seeing that his sister-in-law was so concerned, Chun-Shi had to soften his tone and smiled at her. Don't worry, I'm just going to Daiyu Island to get something. I'll be back soon. Chapter 367. Daiyu Island. Heron Island, the pavilion in the middle of the lake. As the saying goes, the cicada senses the golden wind before it moves, sending the impermanence of death without knowing it. Ever since Jiang Zhengqing was injured by that outsider who came out of nowhere, the sky above Daiyu Island seemed to be shrouded in thick dark clouds. Everyone in the clan was anxious, and the atmosphere was gloomy. Everyone seemed to be more cautious than usual. As the clan leader, Jiang Yuankuei did not step forward to appease everyone at such a critical time. Instead, he stayed on Heron Island all day, doing something unknown. Everyone thought that the clan leader was planning something big, but no one knew. Jiang Yuankuei himself was confused. Apart from preserving the most complete inheritance, the Jiang clan also had an immortal old monster who had lived for thousands of years. Based on this alone, Daiyu Island was destined to have too many secrets that no one knew. The great ancestor's seniority was there. Once the old man spoke, Jiang Yuankuei naturally had to bow and listen. The great ancestor's words were simple. He wanted him to wait outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake and wait patiently for the fated person to appear. The fated person? Who was the fated person? Who was the fated person? The great ancestor's words must have a deeper meaning, so Jiang Yuankuei had been thinking about this question for the past few days. However, no matter how hard he thought about it, he could not come up with a reliable answer. Until this day, a sudden tide of spiritual energy enveloped the entire world. As the place with the densest spiritual energy within 100 miles, a cloud vortex inevitably appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. This scene was very similar to the scene described in Immortals at the Magpie Bridge. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it surpasses countless things in the human world. It was only at this moment that Jiang Yuankuei suddenly realized the sky had changed. Sure enough, when sword rays streaked across the sky and shot toward the vortex from afar, Jiang Yuankuei finally understood who the fated person the great ancestor was talking about was. In this world, there is actually someone who is unwilling to ascend to the great world and was instead trying his best to stop the divine gate from opening, going against the entire great world with his own strength. What kind of courage was this? Even Jiang Yuankuei could not help but be fascinated. However, Jiang Yuankuei was the clan leader after all. He had to think carefully about everything. Therefore, in the next moment, a thought suddenly popped up in his mind. If the divine gate could not be opened, who was the biggest beneficiary? Weren't they the 5 lands of legacy? Even though the old ancestor had never explicitly mentioned it, Jiang Yuanke was keenly aware of the problem at this moment. When the spirit Qi on Earth began to recover, what was the difference between Earth and the Great World? The desert had already become an oasis, so why would the people need to migrate again? On Earth, they were the high and mighty Jiang clan, but in the Great World, they were sinners who were as lowly as ants. Since that was the case, why was the Jiang clan still anxiously waiting for the gate of heaven to open? Isn't it good to stay on Earth? Thinking of this, Jiang Yuanque couldn't help but look back at the pavilion in the middle of the lake. His face suddenly revealed a complicated expression of worry and joy. Could it be the elder ancestor really had such a plan? Jiang Yuanque stood at the bridgehead, letting his imagination run wild. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. Following that, he passed through the formation at an extremely fast speed and landed outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Only when that person opened the door curtain and made a slight movement did Jiang Yuanque's heart suddenly tremble. He quickly turned around and angrily shouted, "Who is it? How dare you trespass into the forbidden area of my clan?" However, before he could step forward to stop him, the elder ancestor's voice slowly came from the house. "Yuanque, you can leave first." Hearing this, Jiang Yuanque couldn't help but stop. He quickly bowed and replied, "Yes. Also, pass on my order. Ring the 9-dragon bell and summon all the elders in the clan. I have something important to announce to everyone." 9-dragon bell. Hearing this, Jiang Yuanque subconsciously opened his eyes wide. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. The elder ancestor seemed to have noticed his abnormality, so he spoke again to confirm it. "Go, ring the 9-dragon bell." "Yes, elder ancestor." This time, he finally heard it clearly. Therefore, Jiang Yuanque immediately went to the bell tower by the lake. After taking a deep breath, he was full of excitement. He pushed the hammer hard and rang the ancient bronze bell in front of him that hadn't been rung for thousands of years. Dong! 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 The heavy and distant sound of the bell suddenly rang out, startling tens of thousands of birds on the island. Before the bell rang for the 9th time, the bridge outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake was already densely packed with people. Among these people, the ones with the lowest cultivation were diviners. Among them were Jiang Yuanque's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and the various Jiang clan ancestors. It was obvious that they were the core strength of the Jiang clan. These people used to represent the glory of the Jiang clan, but now they were representing the future of the Jiang clan. With the continuous recovery of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the shackles of heaven and earth had been completely broken. In this short 1 year, many diviners had appeared in the Jiang clan. Among them, there were even those above diviners led by Jiang Zhengqing. The future had come, and it had arrived. The Jiang clan was like a ferocious beast entrenched on Daiyu Island. At this moment, it finally revealed its ferocious and terrifying true face. Among the people by the lake, Jiang Yuanque's seniority was the lowest. However, due to his status as the current patriarch, Jiang Yuanque was fortunate enough to stand in the first row of the bridge. The entire place was silent. One could hear a pin drop. Everyone lowered their heads and ears, quietly waiting for the old ancestor to speak. No one knew who the old ancestor was talking to, nor did they know the content of their conversation. In short, after a long, long time, the old ancestor's voice suddenly rang out, instantly shaking everyone's hearts. "I am Jiang Yin, the 17th generation patriarch of the Jiang clan. Today, I declare the Jiang clan will form an alliance with Mr. Chun and fight against Tiandu together." In ancient times, what crime did the Jiang clan commit? But the divine ancestor, for his own selfish reasons, listed our Jiang clan as sinners and suffered the pain of being trapped for 10,000 years. However, there is no need for such a crime. Today, we will follow Mr. Chun to expel the heavenly gate and break off Tiandu's path of retreat in order to protect our homeland. This is to inherit the legacy of our ancestors, where righteousness lies. All the clansmen of the Jiang clan should take this as their responsibility. Everyone knows this. This sudden declaration of war instantly stupefied all of the Jiang clan clansmen present. The old ancestor wanted to crusade against Hindu. Didn't the clan often offer sacrifices and pray for Tiandu to open a door so that the clansmen could ascend to the great world? Why did he suddenly want to rebel and go against Tiandu with the banner of Tiandu? Perhaps because the news came too suddenly, everyone was unable to accept it for a while. Many hot-tempered clansmen risked disobeying the old ancestor and kept asking why in a loud voice. One had to know that the great world was the immortal world that everyone dreamed of. What was the purpose of a person's life? If it weren't for the limited conditions on earth, how could they be trapped in the heavenly realm? Only by going to the great world would they have the possibility of continuing to break through. Only by going to the great world and improving their realm could they live for another 100, 200, or even 1,000 years. Everyone had long had enough of being unable to break through because of the shackles of heaven and earth. It wasn't that they couldn't do it, but that the conditions didn't allow it. And this was the fundamental reason why people felt sad. The crowd was restless. Everyone was questioning the old ancestors' decision. If it weren't for the fact that the direct descendants of Jiang Yuanke were still trying to appease everyone, many people would have already rushed into the pavilion in the middle of the lake and demanded an explanation from the old ancestor. Just when the situation was out of control, a figure suddenly lifted the curtain and slowly walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. So annoying. A bunch of short-sighted people. Sorry, my friend got married the day before yesterday. His hometown is really too far away. It takes 5 hours by car. When he gets there, he has to help out in all kinds of ways. He's really exhausted. I started to sleep when I got home last night. I'm finally full of energy today. I hope everyone can forgive me. Chapter 368. A hint of surprise flashed across everyone's faces when they saw the young man who suddenly walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. It was true that cultivators could retain their youth forever and even regain their youthful vigor, but this was based on a strong foundation of cultivation. The person in front of them looked so young, which meant he was either a young man who was still wet behind the ears or an old man who had been through a lot. The former was almost impossible, so only the latter was left. Is this the Mr. Chun who injured Jingqing? I think so. I was a little late that day. When I got there, the elder ancestor had already asked him to move to Heron Island, so I only saw his back, but looking at this figure, this should be Mr. Chun without a doubt. I heard that Zhengqing couldn't even take one hit from this person. Is this true? Yes, Zhengqing probably underestimated his opponent. After all, he just broke through to the above divinity stage, so it's inevitable that he's a little impetuous based on Mr. Chen's previous battle record. This person should have already stepped into the above divinity stage. It makes sense that he could easily defeat Zhengqing. I see. Everyone whispered to each other. At the same time, they had their own thoughts, but no one expressed them. Everyone heard the elder ancestors' words, but whether they agreed or not was another matter. Forming an alliance with Mr. Chun to fight against Heaven Capital? Putting aside the fact that Mr. Chun dared to make an enemy out of Heaven Capital, just the Jiang clan alone, could it really be that they could wrestle with the ancient cultivators in the great world? Any random divine general who came out of the divine gate could probably clean up Daiyu Island from top to bottom. In fact, even Chun Shi felt that this was a little unbelievable. He had only come to ask the elder ancestor for the 500-year-old ginseng flower, hoping to use it to heal the internal injuries on his body. But he did not expect. When the elder ancestor confirmed that he was the one who defeated this rare spirit tide, he immediately expressed that he wanted to form an alliance with him to stop the divine gate from opening. What was going on? After thinking about it seriously, Chun Shi finally understood the elder ancestor's intentions. On Earth, the Jiang clan was one of the 5 great lands of heritage respected by everyone. But in the great world, The Jiang clan was the descendant of a sinner who didn't even have the qualifications to enter the sect. It was a very simple multiple-choice question, wasn't it? However, due to the slave nature of his subconscious mind, even Chun-Shi felt that going against the great world was simply courting death. Instead, it was this old man who had lived for over 1,000 years who saw through the essence of it at a glance and made the most correct choice, blocking the heavenly gate and separating the two realms. Only in this way would the Jiang clan truly welcome its own glory. But unfortunately, the truth is always in the hands of the minority. Chun-Shi stood at the head of the bridge and silently sized up the people in front of him. However, these people were looking at him with hostile gazes. Chun-Shi didn't have any reaction to this, because he knew someone would stand up for him. As expected, just as the crowd was discussing animatedly, a stern shout exploded in everyone's ears like a sudden clap of thunder. Lonesome, a bunch of short-sighted people. If it weren't for the fact that I already have half a foot in the Yellow Spring, why would I place such high hopes on you people? This old man has lived for over 1,000 years and has long seen the change of dynasties and the change of masters of mountains and rivers. You people count on the heavenly gate to ascend, but the heavenly gate hasn't opened for a long time. Now that it opens again and again, you people don't reflect on the deeper meaning behind it. Instead, you are like hungry dogs begging for food, wishing that you could ascend immediately. Those who have such thoughts are truly ignorant, short-sighted, unable to distinguish right from wrong, and causing harm in the evening. This old man stands here today to tell you all, misfortune is a blessing in disguise, and a blessing in disguise. Thousands of years have passed, and circumstances have changed with the passage of time. China has been restored, and the spiritual energy is torrential. You people count on ascending to the upper realm, but you don't know that the people of the upper realm. I also want to return to the divine great land and fight against you all. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. The ancient cultivators were coming back. Why? Why? Wasn't it because the great world was just a crack in the depths of the universe? Therefore, there was actually a fundamental difference between it and Earth. Earth was a planet with life, a holy land for cultivation. Even if there was a period of time when the spirit chi was weak, this situation was only temporary. However, this short period of time might be very long for humans. It could be thousands of years or tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. But for a planet with a lifespan of 10 billion years, 1 million years was too short, and 10 million years was too short. Even 100 million years only occupied 1% of its lifespan. And the great world? It was just a crack in the void, and it might suddenly close one day. Without the constant support of a planet with life, no matter how rich the spiritual energy in the great world was, there would be a day when it would be exhausted. They were both spiritual energy, but one was a renewable resource, and the other was a non-renewable resource. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. Humans had to learn to be vigilant in times of peace. Therefore, the main point was not whether the spiritual energy in the great world was exhausted, but the spiritual energy on Earth had begun to recover. Since that was the case, why not return to Earth in advance to preserve the resources of the great world and deal with the next age of chaos? Therefore, just as the person behind the heavenly gate said, the return of Tiandu, it had to be done. The reason why the old man was able to see through this before Chun-Shi, it was because his thoughts were different from hers. Chun-Shi only wanted a family of 3 to live a peaceful life, while the old man wanted to take advantage of the situation and rise up in response to the heavens, thereby changing the fate of the Jiang family in one fell swoop. If they could really cut off the connection between the two worlds, then from now on, the Jiang family would be the most powerful legacy force in the world. Tens of thousands of years of accumulation, it was time to welcome the day when it would explode. Perhaps because there was an outsider like Chun-Shi present, the old man's lecture did not last for too long, and many of his words were not that straightforward. However, since he had already flipped out, Naturally, no one dared to jump out and question him. The scene quickly quieted down, and everyone lowered their heads, pretending to be docile. A gentle breeze blew, ruffling the calm surface of the lake. After a long while, the old man's voice sounded again. Yuan Kuei, pass on my command. Open the seal, pluck the Adumbra flower, and give it to Mr. Chun. Jiang Yunkei was stunned for a moment, somewhat doubting whether he had heard wrongly. The Adumbra flower? As long as one was a member of the Jiang family, there was not a single person who had not imagined that they would be the fated person for this flower. Jiang Zhengqing had dared to force Jiang Yuankui to hand over the Adumbra flower during the clan sacrifice ceremony, because he had relied on his cultivation above the heavenly man level and was certain that the elder ancestor would not do anything to him. After all, one should not let one's own fertile water flow into one's own fields. But now, the elder ancestor wanted to give this rare flower to an outsider. Could it be that he had heard wrongly? Jiang Yunkui was completely dumbfounded, so after hearing the old man's words, he still stood in the same spot, unmoving. However, before the Jiang family members present could voice their doubts, the old man's voice rang out again. Ancestor Yushan left behind this Adumbra flower before he ascended, and left a prophecy. This flower belongs to the fated person. Since the fated person has already been found, then it's time to pluck this flower. Go, pass on my command. Give the Adumbra flower to Mr. Chun. Chapter 369. The Adumbra flower. Upon hearing these words, even Chun, she couldn't help but reveal an astonished expression. He really didn't expect that the Adumbra flower would exist on Earth. The words of the Adumbra flower were auspicious. It only appeared once every 3,000 years and was a heavenly flower that didn't exist in this world. But in reality, the Adumbra flower's seedlings weren't very rare. What was truly rare was its 3,000-year flowering period. A whole 3,000 years. One had to know that with Chun Shi's current cultivation, he could barely live for 2,000 years. But this Adumbra flower needed 3,000 years of cultivation before it could fully mature and bloom. Just based on this growth period alone, it was destined that this strange flower would have extraordinary effects. According to the rumors in the pugilistic world, even if an ordinary person consumed this flower, he or she would be able to become an immortal and ascend to the heavens. He or she would immediately live as long as the heavens and the earth, and be as old as the sun and moon. Of course, this was just an unreliable rumor. When Chun Shi was in the heavenly spiral continent, he had heard that mature Adumbra flower had appeared in the north. During that time, countless immortal cultivators rushed to the north almost every day in an attempt to obtain this flower. This flower was like a food shortage on an isolated island. Naturally, it would attract the attention of countless wild beasts. But there was only one Adumbra flower, but tens of thousands of immortal cultivators had participated in the fight for it. Naturally, a bloodbath had begun because of this. Countless people had paid the price with their lives. More than half of the north had become a living hell, a furnace of flesh and blood. So much so that even after this incident had died down, the words Adumbra flower could still cause people's expressions to change. With Chun Shi's personality, he naturally didn't want to participate in this kind of fight. But this didn't mean that he wasn't interested in the Adumbra flower. If the ancient records were correct, this flower was a rare treasure. It had the miraculous effect of nourishing one's golden core and nourishing one's soul. If an ordinary person consumed it, they could even complete a transformation in an extremely short amount of time and condense a golden core. What kind of concept was this? A golden core, a lifespan of 500 years. If an ordinary person could directly advance to a golden core after consuming it, how powerful would its effect be if it was used as medicine, refined, and then given to immortal cultivators to consume? When he thought of this, Chun Shi suddenly felt a sense of excitement. However, this feeling was not for himself, but for Qin Ruoying, who was still lying in bed. After all, as a qualified husband, He could only use the iPhone 8 that his wife had exchanged for if she had switched to the iPhone 10. The logic was that simple. She had even made up his mind. Even if he had to turn hostile and snatch the Adumbra flower, he was going to snatch it back. Ginseng flowers nourish the body, blood thorns nourish the mind, and the Adumbra flower. Although Chun-Shi's alchemy skills could not be considered top-notch, he should be able to use these 3 precious herbs to concoct a cauldron of 10 complete tonics. Ying would eat the meat and he would drink the soup. Wouldn't that be perfect? Perhaps he could even use this opportunity to heal the internal injuries in his body and rule over this world in his peak state. By then, he only needed to stand in front of the heavenly gate and see if anyone could come out of the great world. Chun-Shi pondered silently. Although he really wanted to obtain this Adumbra flower, he did not let his guard down because of this. As the saying went, one who is unaccountably solicitous was hiding evil intentions. The old man's motives were indeed very suspicious. Why did he have to give this Adumbra flower to him for no reason? Chun-Shi could not figure out. The Jiang clan members probably could not figure it out either. But now was not the time to delve into this question. So Chun-Shi could only put this question aside for the time being and wait for the Jiang clan's final statement. Although the old man had already formed Ying, after losing his physical body, he was more like a mascot and did not have any substantial deterrence. So Chun-Shi did not have much hope. Didn't he see that the group of people opposite him looked like they wanted to eat him alive? The watermelon that they had raised for a year had been stolen just like that. No one would be able to accept that, right? If a fight had to break out, for the sake of the old man, Chun-Shi could be merciful and guarantee that he would not harm anyone's life. Chun-Shi was prepared to fight, but the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. After hearing the old man's order to deal with them according to the clan rules, the originally restless crowd instantly quieted down. Everyone glared angrily at Chun-Shi, but no one dared to stand out and question the old man's decision. From this, it could be seen how high the old man's position in the Jiang clan was. Yuan Kuei go. After the old man spoke for the 3rd time, no matter how unwilling Jiang Yuan Kuei was, he could only sigh helplessly in the end. Then, he bowed and replied, Yuan Kuei accepts the order. Old ancestor, please wait for a moment. After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuan Kuei flicked his sleeves and left with an indignant expression. He was the current clan leader of the Jiang clan and was the old ancestor's direct descendant. So, Jiang Yuan Kuei had always thought that the old ancestor was biased towards him. It was laughable that he had been constantly fighting with Jiang Jingqing in the open and in the shadows all these years. Who would have thought that in the end, he had made a wedding dress for someone else? How could Jiang Yuan Kuei not be angry? But although he was angry, he still had to listen to the old ancestor's orders. The seal was on the stone platform on the other side of the lake. Through the clan leader's imprint, Jiang Yuan-Kuei quickly opened the seal and saw the full appearance of the Adumbra flower with his own eyes. This was a plant that had never appeared on Earth before. If he really had to describe it, its appearance was somewhat like an Inga pineapple. Its leaves were like fans, and its entire body was sparkling and translucent. It was as if it was made of crystal, and its fine hair could be seen. As soon as the seal was opened, a refreshing fragrance wafted out with the breeze. Jiang Yuan-Kuei only took a breath and felt his entire body relax, as if he had an inexhaustible energy. The flower was a strange flower, but it was as weak as a roadside rose. Jiang Yuan-Kuei only used a little force and plucked this strange flower that people yearned for day and night. It was unknown if it was because the desire in his heart was too strong, but after Jiang Yuan-Kuei plucked the Adumbra flower, he forgot himself and put it on the tip of his nose to sniff it. As the eldest son of the direct descendant, Jiang Fengyan naturally had to stay by Jiang Yuan-Kuei's side. At this moment, he saw that Jiang Yuan-Kuei was in a daze after receiving the flower, so he could not help but remind him, "Father, the seal is not closed yet. Why don't I take it?" Hearing this, Jiang Yuan-Kuei seemed to wake up from a dream. He looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake with a flustered expression, then said in a slightly embarrassed manner, "Ahem. Go, I'll close the seal. You go and present this flower to Mr. Chun." After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuan Kuei carefully handed the Adumbra flower to Jiang Fengyan. At this moment, the father and son's expressions were like torchbearers passing the Olympic flame. They looked exceptionally serious. However, the next moment, something unexpected happened. After Jiang Fengyan received the Adumbra flower, he seemed to have gone crazy. He took off running in the opposite direction. This unexpected change stunned Jiang Yuan Kuei for a moment. By the time he came back to his senses, Jiang Fengyan had already run nearly 100 meters away. He must have used all his strength. Fengyan, what are you doing? Hurry up and get back here. Jiang Fengyan was only one step away from becoming a diviner. Running at full speed, his speed was naturally extremely fast. Seeing this, Jiang Yuan Kuei could not help but feel anxious. Just as he was about to chase after him, he heard Jiang Fengyan roar without turning his head. Father, why should you give this flower to an outsider? The elder ancestor is unjust. I don't accept this. At this moment, Jiang Fengyan was like a child who had been wronged. After being scolded by an adult, he wanted to escape from this place as far as possible. However, among the people present, the person with the lowest cultivation was a diviner. How could he tolerate such nonsense? Jiang Fengyan had probably thought of this as well. Therefore, while he was running, he grabbed the Adumbra flower and stuffed it into his mouth. Since his father could not have it, then no one else could. He would die today. Chapter 370. People were always greedy. The so-called 5 poisonous hearts of Buddhism: greed, anger, stupidity, hesitation, and doubt. In ancient books, it was often mentioned that lust was the leader of all evils, but this lust did not refer to sex, but to indulge and indulge without restraint, which was also greed. That is, the source of all evils. Greed was the leader of all evils. Greed, in fact, was the root of all troubles. Could it be that Jiang Fengyan really took the Adumbra flower because he refused to accept the decision of the ancestor? People often said, even if you have money, you need to be alive to spend it. But this Adumbra flower was a rare treasure that could not be bought with money. And the most important point was this flower was easy to take, and one only needed to open their mouth and swallow the flower, and it would immediately take effect. In the face of such a strong temptation, even someone with a firm heart like Jiang Yuan Kuei could not help but feel greedy, let alone Jiang Fengyan, a young man who was still wet behind the ears. Therefore, Jiang Fengyan decided to gamble with his little life. As long as he cooked the rice, the ancestor should not do anything to him because he was the eldest son of the direct line of descent. No matter what, Jiang Fengyan was still a pure-blooded Jiang clansman. Even if he took the Adumbra flower, it would just flow to his family's field. It had to be said that Jiang Fengyan was indeed very bold, but he neglected the most important question, and that was, how far could he run? When he was caught, would he be able to successfully swallow this Adumbra flower? Jiang Fengyan overestimated his speed and greatly underestimated the pursuit he would face. In fact, the moment Jiang Fengyan ran away, Chunshi had already noticed something was wrong. The reason why he did not immediately take action was actually because he wanted to see if they could solve this problem on their own for the sake of the old man. After all, he was just a guest who came to visit. How could a guest go to the kitchen to serve dishes by himself? Based on this consideration, Chunshi did not stop Jiang Fengyan. However, the Jiang clan members present seemed to have been struck dumb by this sudden turn of events. After a long while, a few people came back to their senses first, and then directly set off to chase. The speed of running was naturally not as fast as the speed of flying. But Jiang Fengyan never thought of running away. He only wanted to use this opportunity to stall for time so that he could successfully swallow the entire Adumbra flower. Therefore, as soon as those people rose into the air, Jiang Fengyan had already stuffed the Adumbra flower into his mouth. Sigh. Seeing that it was too late to stop him, Chunshi could only sigh silently and prepare to do it himself. However, Just as Chun-Shi was about to attack, the old man's voice suddenly exploded from the clouds, causing the entire Heron Island to tremble. "Evil creature, how dare you!" That voice was so loud that it sounded like the furious roar of a deity. Immediately afterward, a huge amount of true essence gushed out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The ferocity of its momentum was as if the heavens and earth were collapsing, and the mountains were collapsing, and the earth was cracking. An incomparably surging Zhen Yuan poured out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The lake water that was affected by the Zhen Yuan suddenly sprayed up into the sky like a fountain. In that instant, raging waves filled the sky, and the mountains and rivers trembled. The entire Heron Island was trembling in the old man's anger. Seeing this, Jiang Yuan Kuei was so scared that his liver and gallbladder were almost torn apart. He could only look up to the sky and shout in panic, "This child is not sensible. Ancestor, please show mercy and spare his life." Unfortunately, Jiang Yuan Kuei's words were still too late. A water column suddenly rose from the lake and then shot toward Jiang Fengyan at an unimaginable speed. At that moment, time seemed to have stopped. Jiang Fengyan even maintained the posture of wanting to swallow the Adumbra flower as he ran. Boom! However, the huge wave arrived first. Like a flash flood, it instantly swallowed Jiang Fengyan whole. When the huge wave dissipated, the rocks, weeds, trees, and slopes where Jiang Fengyan was standing were all buried by the huge wave. As a result, the area within a few hundred meters had become a ruined scene after the flash flood. There was nothing left. Only broken trees, broken branches, and yellow soil were left on the ground. After seeing such a scene, Jiang Yuan Kuei couldn't help but feel sad. After rushing to the place where Jiang Fengyan was before, he completely disregarded his image and used his hands to search the soil. "Fengyan, Fengyan, where are you? Father is here to save you. Where are you? Answer me." The so-called father and son were connected by heart. At this moment, it was deeply reflected. Even if Jiang Fengyan had committed a heinous crime, Jiang Yuan Kuei couldn't bear to see him suffer any harm. But how powerful was the ancestor's power? With just one move, everything in front of him was wiped out, including Jiang Fengyan. When he thought that his son might have been killed by the ancestor himself and died without a complete corpse, Jiang Yuan Kuei couldn't help but lie in the soil and cry bitterly. But at this moment, the old man's voice sounded again. "Pass my order. Jiang Fengyan has committed a crime of disobedience. He is punished to meditate in the dry pool for 60 years. During this period, without my permission, he is not allowed to take a step out of the dry pool." The dry pool was the place where the Jiang clan punished sinners. There were all kinds of torturing formations set up in it. But the ancestor asked Jiang Fengyan to stay in there for 60 years, which was 60 years. This could already be considered the harshest punishment. But when Jiang Yuan Kuei heard this sentence, it was as if he had heard great news. He quickly knelt on the ground and kowtowed while shouting, "Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me. Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me. Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me." After the old man made his move, this farce finally came to an end. As for the Adumbra flower that countless people yearned for day and night, under the old man's protection, it flew into Chun-Shi's hands, unharmed. The flower finally fell into the hands of the fated person. "Thank you." After reaching out to take the Adumbra flower, Chun-Shi turned around and looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake with interest. The old man really hit it well. Just from this, Chun-Shi was enough to judge that the old man's strength at his peak was definitely not inferior to Bai Hong's, as expected of an old man who had lived for more than 1,000 years. He really did not make a move, but when he did, it was indeed shocking. Chun-Shi had always thought that after the old man lost his physical body, he had completely become the Jiang clan's mascot. Now it seemed that he had underestimated the heroes of the world. The old man must have mastered some secret technique that even he did not know about. That was why he could continue to cast spells without a physical body. To be honest, Chun-Shi was now more and more interested in this old man. He hid too many secrets, and Chun-Shi could not understand his motives at all. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. So here came the question. From the beginning, the old man had been especially attentive to him. Now, he did not hesitate to seriously injure his descendants to give him the Adumbra flower. Chapter 371. 1,000-year-old Go, the reincarnation of the Chicken King. If life was a survival competition, the old man's chances of winning the chicken dinner would be far greater than anyone else's. He wasn't afraid of his opponent being tough or reckless. He was only afraid of his opponent being cunning. If he really met such a wretched opponent, no matter how strong he was, he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. After all, who knew when this old fellow would pop out and stab him in the back? Chun-Shi was indeed very interested in the old man's secrets. Thus, after obtaining the Adumbra flower, he was prepared to return to the pavilion in the middle of the lake to have a good chat with the old man. However, he had just taken a step when the old man's voice suddenly rang out again. Since Sir has already obtained the Adumbra flower, you should be returning from a rewarding journey today. There are many matters to attend to in the clan. You've also seen the farce just now. Please don't take it to heart. I'll teach them a good lesson right now. I'll definitely make sure they remember what rules are. That's all for today. It's inconvenient for me to move around. Please forgive me. UNK, help me send the guests off. After hearing the Elder Master's words, Jiang UNK immediately stood up from the soil and wiped the mud off his face. At the same time, he replied rather excitedly, UNK obeys. After he finished speaking, Jiang UNK shook violently and used his inner yuan to shake off all the mud and dust on his body. His entire person looked like a brand new person, as if he had just taken a bath. If the Elder Master had asked him to send the guests off, that meant, in the Elder Master's heart, he, Jiang Yunkue, was still the current clan leader of the Jiang clan. The Elder Master didn't hold a grudge against him because of what had just happened. How could Jiang Yunkue not be excited? Thus, he immediately ran over to Chun-Shi eagerly. There's no need to send the guests off. Seeing that the old man was closing the door to his guests, Chun-Shi could only smile and shake his head. No matter what, they were still considered allies now. Furthermore, he had received a greeting gift from the old man. Naturally, he couldn't cause any unhappiness with the old man over such a small matter. After all, they had just formed an alliance and were still in their honeymoon period. I came in a hurry today, so I didn't bring any gifts. Instead, I received a big gift from you for no reason. I'll remember this favor for now. Once I've refined this Adumbra flower into a pill, I'll bring a portion back for you. That way, your grandchildren won't blame me for stealing their good stuff. Having said that, Chun-Shi shifted his gaze to the direction where Jiang Fengyan was just now. That location was originally a small forest. The forest was full of fragrant grass and flowers. It was indeed a place with excellent scenery. But unfortunately, after being struck by the old man in anger, all that was left of this place was a puddle of yellow soil and mud. It looked like an abandoned construction site on a rainy day. It was a messy scene. The scenery on Heron Island was picturesque. However, this scene was like a drop of ink accidentally spilled on a painting, completely destroying the beauty of the entire painting. This happened because of me. It's a pity for this forest. I don't want to ruin the beautiful scenery of the island because of this. Fine, then let it return to its original form. As he spoke, Chun-Shi raised his hands and made a gesture. Immediately after, a flower formed by the condensation of vital qi slowly bloomed in his palm. After Chun-Shi gently waved his hand, the glowing green flower flew straight to the ruins. The Jiang clan members present were somewhat confused. They had no idea what Chun-Shi was doing. The only thing they could confirm was everyone was quite dissatisfied with Chun-Shi's words and deeds. They only felt that he was taking advantage of the situation and saying useless words. To be honest, instead of wasting time here, he might as well get out of Daiyu Island as soon as possible. Out of sight, out of mind. Who didn't know how to say beautiful words? It was just a small forest. If it was destroyed, so be it. Did they need him to repair it? How was he going to repair it? He was just spouting nonsense. Because the elder ancestor had just flipped out, No one dared to directly express their dissatisfaction. They could only look at Chun-Shi with a rather strange expression. However, the next moment, something that caused everyone to be dumbstruck suddenly happened just like that. It was clearly early autumn, but Heron Island seemed to have ushered in the return of spring and the revival of all things. Green sprouts rapidly grew at a speed visible to the naked eye on the yellow soil and mud within a radius of a few hundred meters. Then, in the short span of a few breaths, these green sprouts grew into countless plants and flowers. Large trees were uprooted from the ground, and fresh flowers bloomed brilliantly. In an instant, fragrant grass covered the ground, and mountain flowers bloomed brilliantly. Although it was still a far cry from the lush greenery from before, it was no less than a miracle in everyone's eyes. Who present did not have the ability to destroy mountains and break rocks. However, it was undoubtedly a fantasy to ask them to revive all things and rejuvenate them. It was just like how humans had invented an unparalleled nuclear bomb, but still had not found an effective way to cure cancer. Destruction was always easier than construction. As for them, clearly they were still far from it. After Chun-Shi showed off his skills, the Jiang clan members present finally understood why the elder ancestor was so friendly to this outsider. As the saying went, knowing someone by their reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. The Jiang clan members present finally had a deep understanding of the 3 words Mr. Chun. Sir, you have great skills. This old man has learned something today. The old man praised from the bottom of his heart. After Chun-Shi heard that, he smiled and waved his hand. He replied nonchalantly, "All right, I won't say any more pleasantries. I'll visit you another day. Goodbye." As soon as she finished speaking, Chun-Shi suddenly disappeared under the watchful eyes of the crowd. After he left, many Jiang clan members seemed to have come back to their senses. They hurriedly looked around, trying to find his departing figure. Chun-Shi was also very satisfied with his performance just now. Therefore, on the way back to Shangjing, he was still recalling that feeling in his mind. Compared to when he made Qing Shan wear the red makeup, his current methods could be considered to be more skillful. In fact, it could be counted as a spell, but could also be counted as not, because it included the use of vital essence and Chun-Shi's comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth. It was definitely not as simple as casting a spell. The laws of heaven and earth were a very mysterious thing. From the reincarnation of life and death, to the rotation of the sun and moon, to the rise of clouds and rosy clouds, to the blowing of the wind on the hills. Even if it was as small as gravel or dust, it contained a certain amount of the laws of heaven and earth. Just as the eminent monks often said, every sip and every bite was predetermined. There must be a reason for the Lanyin silk fruit. This made Chun-Shi feel a little strange. After all, he usually did not cultivate at all. When he had time, he would accompany his wife and play with his children. Why did his comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth become deeper? Could it be this was the so-called cultivation in the secular world? Only by experiencing the secular world could one taste the various forms of life and enjoy the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Since Tianxian already had the 3 paths of heartless, unruffled, and heartless, then why couldn't he create a brand new emotional path based on his own experience? Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trust, gentleness, respect, frugality, and tolerance. With the traditional virtues of Hua Xia as the outline, he created his own path. Chapter 372. For ordinary people, National Day was still National Day, except that there was a rainstorm that didn't last long. It was sunny after the rain, and the autumn air was refreshing. It was a good time for sightseeing. With the rise of short videos, many cities in the Southwest began to gradually become popular on the internet, which also diverted a lot of tourists from the old tourist cities. As the capital of a country, Shangjing had its own unique cultural heritage, so during the National Day holiday, the capital was still the first choice for people to travel in the country. The Great Wall, the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square, Prince Gong's mansion, Summer Palace, Hohai, almost all the famous scenic spots were crowded with tourists. As far as the eye could see, there was a dense mass of people at the back of their heads. It was truly crowded and bustling with noise and excitement. As for the annoying rain just now, obviously, it was completely forgotten by everyone. However, it was because of the heavy rain just now that Shangjing finally ushered in a good day with clear skies and clear winds. The sky was blue and the clouds were white. There was no trace of fog, and the sky was blue like the satin produced by the Jiangning weaving department. It looked particularly smooth and soft, and people couldn't help but want to reach out and touch it. If you add in the fresh and pleasant air, even the tourists who were complaining about the rain just now couldn't wait for another heavy rain like this tomorrow, so that they could enjoy the most complete classical beauty of Shangjing. All the scenic spots were lively, but the most unique old alley of Shangjing was still so quiet. Tourists in twos and threes stood in the alley taking photos. When they saw Chen, she directly opened the door of the courtyard. They couldn't help but show a trace of envy in their eyes. The courtyard of Shangjing. It was very valuable. When Shi crossed the Chuehua gate with big and small bags, Qin Ruoying had already woken up. Qin Xueqing accompanied her in the room and talked. Because Gu Lao hadn't seen Shi for a long time, he called Xiao Yuan to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The three little guys' activity level was seriously over the limit. So when Shi entered the door, he saw the three of them lying on the sofa watching cartoons attentively. This was their family's national day. It was an ordinary national day. The sister-in-law seemed to want to know what Shi was doing just now, so she couldn't help but ask a few times. However, she was fooled by Shi. Going to Daiyu Island was an official matter, but going home was a private matter. Public affairs and private affairs should not be mixed together. She had always been very clear about this. After the backbone returned, the Sihuan quickly became lively again, as if nothing had happened. Gu Lao was in charge of cooking, and Shi and Xiao Yuan were his assistants. Soon, a large table of delicacies was served. At this time, the shortcomings of the north had to be mentioned, and that was the temperature difference between day and night was huge, and the sun set quickly. Just after 6 o'clock, the sky gradually darkened. When it was time to light the lanterns, the heavy rain had just stopped. Raindrops that had not yet dried up slowly rolled down from the leaves. Birds were looking out from under the eaves. The wind was cool, bringing with it the fragrance of the earth that came from nowhere. The little fellow looked up and saw a few stars blinking in the sky. This song is so nice. Papa taught me. I learned it right away. It's very easy. Come, I'll teach you. Sing with me. The dark sky hangs low, and the bright stars follow. Insects fly. Insects fly. Who are you thinking of in the brightly lit central room? The little fellow did not have stage fright in front of the big family. Instead, she clapped her hands and sang Insects Fly with her sweet voice. Although the brothers were a little embarrassed, they still plucked up the courage to sing with the little fellow under everyone's constant encouragement. The beautiful child's voice kept ringing in the room. For a moment, the big courtyard was a little more warm because of this. The 7-day holiday passed quickly. She also did as the little girl wished. In these few days, she took the two brothers to accompany her in Shangjing City to play to their heart's content. However, playing was one thing. When the holiday was over, she had to go to school. For this reason, the father and daughter held pinky hooks. Probably because she was in a good mood at that time, Yin also patted her chest and promised that she would go to kindergarten when school started. But when it was the day of school, the little fellow stayed in bed and did not want to get up. She had no choice but to carry her to kindergarten. For this reason, Yin lost her temper. If she had not heard that the brothers had already gone to kindergarten, she would have been rolling on the ground. Then again, even adults had holiday syndrome, let alone a child who was only the size of a bean. Therefore, she could understand Yin's feelings. However, considering that the child was growing up day by day, preschool education was really important. Therefore, she could only bear the pain and play the role of a strict father for once. After all this time, He could not give up halfway like before, right? When the father and daughter arrived at the school, there were already many parents sitting in the classroom with their children. In fact, compared with other children, Nyan's performance was already very good. At least she did not cry, right? When she found the two brothers in the classroom, the performance of the three little fellows was even more outstanding. Other children were crying, but the three of them were happily playing with the small toys prepared by the teacher. The teacher used the performance of the three of them to encourage other children. After the little fellow heard this, her little face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Therefore, before Chun-Shi spoke, the little fellow took the initiative to say to Chun-Shi, "It's time for class. Papa, go back. I'm not afraid." Looking at her proud little face, it seemed that she had completely forgotten how she was lying in bed in the morning. "Okay, you three be good and listen to the teacher. Papa will pick you up later. Goodbye, Papa." Looking at Nyan's cute little face, Chun-Shi's heart melted. Therefore, like many other parents, he stood in the corridor and secretly watched for a long time before he reluctantly left. Nyan started school, and Chun-Shi finally had some free time. In fact, during this period of time, he had been thinking about how to combine the prescription in order to maximize the medicinal effects of the Dumbra flower. After all, he had too few resources at his disposal and could only supplement it with ordinary herbs. Chun-Shi pondered over the prescription as he walked out of the school gate. However, at this moment, an A6 suddenly stopped in front of him. Then, a man rolled down the window and smiled at him. "Mr. Chun, can I give you a ride? Today is October 21st. It's my birthday. Birthday wish. Finish the book properly, don't end it badly. This is also the first time I've written a book to 800,000 words. I've completely turned from a semi-newcomer to a veteran author. I've also experienced a lot of ups and downs. I'm only half a step away from becoming a god, so my mentality has changed a lot compared to a year ago. This book has already reached 50,000 high subscriptions when it was 700,000 words. It's really 50,000. There's absolutely no exaggeration. Unfortunately, I collapsed. I've indeed never written so many words before, so I'm getting weaker and weaker towards the end. Practicing with 10,000 subscriptions, thinking slowly, writing slowly, learning slowly. I don't think there are many people in Yuan who have tried this. Therefore, I definitely won't stop writing because I still need to improve. Well, I won't say any more nonsense. Actually, I just want to sincerely thank everyone for their continuous support on my birthday. Every comment, every recommendation ticket, every monthly ticket, every gift. I've seen it all and remembered it in my heart. Chapter 373. "Mr. Chun, can I give you a ride?" The man in front of him was Wang Junsheng, who sat at the same table as Chun-Shi on the day Nyan entered the school. Perhaps it was because of his age, but Wang Junsheng always gave off a mature and steady vibe. It was what people often referred to as manliness. When this kind of man smiled, even as a man, he could not help but be captivated by his charm and seriously think about every word he said. This was the charm of a mature man and had nothing to do with gender. If an analogy was to be made, a mature man was like a bottle of aged wine. The moment the bottle was opened, the fragrance was enough to attract everyone's attention. Obviously, Wang Junsheng wanted to use this opportunity to talk to Chun-Shi. But unfortunately, after Chun-Shi heard him, he waved his hand and smiled. "No need, my house is nearby. It's faster to take the small road back." After that, Chun-Shi did not even give Wang Junsheng a chance to speak again. He turned around and walked along the sidewalk. "Brother Wang, who is this guy? Since he's so shameless, why don't I just go and have a chat with him?" Zhao Ziyu was sitting in the driver's seat. After seeing Chun-Shi leave, he suddenly felt like he was insulted. He almost got out of the car to teach Chun-Shi a lesson. "Talk." "How?" "Kidnap him and talk." Wang Junsheng coldly interrupted him. Hearing this, Zhao Ziyu suddenly became like a frosted eggplant and completely withered. It was not difficult to see that the two of them were not ordinary friends. Instead, it was more like a superior and subordinate relationship. "Didn't you always say that you have eyes and ears in Beijing? It's been more than a month. How come there is no reliable news at all? Didn't we already investigate to Zhonghai?" We even found the household register for you. If you ask me, this guy is just a bumpkin. Brother Wang, why do you care so much about him? How can a bumpkin get a kid into this school? Wang Junsheng casually asked a rhetorical question and directly made Zhao Ziyu speechless. Actually, thinking about it, it made sense even though it was just a small kindergarten. The water inside was deep. From the first day the children stepped into this kindergarten, regardless of their future academic performance, they would definitely follow the pre-planned path all the way forward. They would go through childhood, primary, junior, high, and finally plunge into the top schools in the country, such as Qing, Beirun, Law, and so on. The only possible fork in the road was the choice between politics and business. Those in business could choose to study abroad, while those in politics had to stay in the country to further their studies. This was indeed the case. While the bumpkins were still warming up at the starting line, others were already drinking champagne and celebrating at the finish line. However, this was not to say that society was unfair. After all, ever since the fall of the Qing dynasty, whose ancestors were not farmers, other people had to go through at least 3 generations of accumulation before their children and grandchildren could enjoy the wealth they had today. All right, let's leave it at that. I just thought that this person wasn't simple, so I wanted to make friends with him. Since she's unwilling, let's put this matter aside for now. Anyway, the child is still young. Let's see how it goes in the future. The car with the Beijing A license plate slowly drove away. At this time, Chun Shi, who had already walked more than 100 meters away, suddenly turned her head to look at the car. Her face revealed a thoughtful expression. Time passed day by day. It was so peaceful that there was not a trace of ripple. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Today was November 1st. It was Halloween abroad and Little Singles Day in China. The autumn air was refreshing, and the smell of osmanthus was wafting in the air. It was a good time to play. And for National Day until now, the only good news during this period was Gu Yao's soul had finally stabilized and could move freely without the soul crystal. Although the soul could not speak, it could convey the emotions in her heart through the soul. Therefore, the moment Chun Shi released her, he sensed the true feelings in Gu Yao's heart. She was very happy, happy from the bottom of her heart. At this time, Gu Yao finally regained a little bit of her humanity. Although her IQ was still slightly lower than that of ordinary people, at least she was no longer a ferocious ghost who lacked brains. In addition to this matter, something else happened that made Chun Shi quite depressed. That was, Nyin no longer called him Papa in a coquettish voice. Thinking about this, Chun Shi's heart immediately gave birth to 10,000 depression. That was because he always felt that the coquettish Papa sounded very intimate, but the clear dad sounded more distant. Here, he had to mention the little guy's growth experience. Because Aunt Zhang was from Sichuan, the little guy grew up with her, and inevitably there was a little Sichuan flavor in his accent. The teachers in the kindergarten were all from Shangjing, so their pronunciation was naturally the most standard Mandarin pronunciation. For the teachers, a child's inaccurate pronunciation was a big problem. Therefore, when they were in school, they would always patiently correct the little guy's pronunciation. As time went by, of course, Papa was gone, and then only Dad was left. In this regard, Chun Shi simply had to suffer in silence. There was a feeling of unspeakable bitterness. Bitter, really bitter. Fortunately, other than this bitter matter, there was nothing else to worry about during this period. Although Qin Ruoying's cultivation progress was still very slow, Chun Shi was not anxious because of this. This was because he believed that as long as the Adumbra flower was refined into a pill, Ying would definitely be able to use it to step into the diviner stage. However, how precious was the Adumbra flower? In the absence of other materials, even he did not dare to act rashly. Therefore, after nearly a month of thinking, Chun Shi finally came up with a more feasible prescription and prepared to officially start refining the pill. However, at this moment, the spirit energy tide appeared again. In the blink of an eye, black clouds rolled and covered half the sky. After a few thunderous rumbles, the heavy rain began to fall. Chun Shi walked out of the room and frowned. After observing for a while, he realized that the tide this time was not very turbulent. The center was also rather far from changing. Seeing this, Chunshi looked as if he had seen something happy. After shaking his head with a smile, he turned around and went back into the room. He was prepared to stay by Qin Ruoying's side and study her symptoms. The reason why Chunshi did not immediately move to contain the tide was because he had reached an agreement with the old man. Therefore, the moment the spirit energy tide appeared, the entire Daiyu Island was in an uproar. In just a moment, hundreds of diviners suddenly flew out of the island like birds, flying in flocks toward the center of the tide. It was as if hundreds of birds were flying through the sky. It was so majestic that it was a rare sight. Chapter 374. The celestial beings were out hunting, patrolling the heavens. Ever since Emperor Qin burned the books and buried the scholars, such a grand event had not happened in the Divine Land for a long time. Daiyu Island's magical formation was activated. Over 300 celestial beings rushed valiantly toward the center of the tide, facing the rolling black clouds, flashing lightning, and rolling thunder. This moment was destined to be recorded in the annals of the Jiang clan, because from this day on, the Jiang clan was no longer a clan of sinners abandoned by the divine ancestor. Under the leadership of the old ancestor, they would compose an epic that belonged to the Jiang clan in this divine great land that was once again filled with vitality. In fact, after the great ancestor made this decision, everyone knew what they were going to face. But at the same time, they also understood one thing, and that was the strong often rose from humble beginnings. In front of the great world, the overall strength of Daiyu Island was as insignificant as an ant. It could be said that any divine general from the Heavenly Gate had the ability to massacre the entire Daiyu Island. After all, 300 celestial beings sounded like a lot, but they were only 300 pseudo-core immortal cultivators. They had not even truly condensed their Jindan. Of course, if these 300 celestial beings formed a formation and attacked and retreated together, even a divine general would not dare to face them head-on. However, this was only a theoretical concept, because a divine general was not a wooden dummy. He only needed to employ guerrilla tactics. Through constant harassment, sneak attacks, and ambushes, how long would it take for him to kill 300 celestial beings? The gap between the two realms was simply too big. 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000. This was what an immortal cultivator should be capable of. If it had been in the past, the Jiang clan would definitely not have the delusion of going against the great world. They were just a lowly clan of sinners. When the spiritual energy was exhausted, they were like sand lizards wandering in the desert. They could only rely on eating maggots and rotten meat to sustain their lives. But suddenly, times had changed. With the continuous recovery of spiritual energy, the desert gradually became an oasis. Looking at the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards swarming toward the oasis, the sand lizards hesitated. Should they continue to live lowly, or should they stand up straight and fight the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards to protect the oasis that originally belonged to them? If he took a gamble, he might end up enraging the ferocious beast, and in the end, he would end up without a corpse. Then he could continue to hide in the soil for the rest of his life, eating maggots and rotting meat. Thank goodness. The Jiang clan still retained the last trace of bravery. So, even if they had to take the risk of their entire clan being annihilated, the Jiang clan still had to fight for that beautiful future under the lead of the old ancestor. Perhaps even the old ancestor didn't realize their present conduct is a perfect reflection of the famous saying, natural selection, survival of the fittest. Compete with the heavens, compete with the earth, and compete with people. Competition was the unchanging truth in the hearts of the immortal cultivators. To Chunshi, defeating the spirit chi tide was just a small matter with a casual swing of his sword. But to the Jiang clan, this was a huge matter that could only be barely accomplished if they went all out. The center of the tide was not far from Daiyu Island. Under Jiang Yuankuei's guidance, the Jiang clan celestials soon arrived at their destination, on a vast and boundless ocean. Because they moved quickly, they were fortunate enough to witness the occurrence of the heavenly anomaly. They saw the waterspout suddenly rising from the surface of the ocean. In just a short moment, the waterspout had already risen to the clouds and was tightly connected with the thunderclouds in the sky. From afar, the waterspout was like a pillar supporting the heavens and the earth by itself. Everyone was stunned. After all, this was the first time they witnessed a heavenly anomaly with their own eyes. In front of such a huge natural phenomenon, the 300-plus people were simply as insignificant as a speck of dust. Boom! Boom! Coupled with the deafening sound of thunder in the sky from time to time, many people started to have thoughts of retreating. The old ancestor wanted them to go against the heavens, faced with such a violent natural phenomenon. Not to mention the others, even the leader, Jiang Yuankei, couldn't help but frown. However, just as everyone was hesitating, a figure suddenly plunged into the waterspout in front of him, and then laughed out loud. A bunch of trash. A mere waterspout scared you all? Didn't you guys always want to know how I broke through? Then you all better watch carefully. The person who spoke was Jiang Zhengqing, who had been beaten into the ground by Chun Shi a few days ago. After this period of recuperation, Jiang Zhengqing's injuries had finally healed by 70 to 80%. He didn't expect that as soon as he appeared today, his wild and unruly nature would once again appear. Actually, among all the people present, Jiang Zhengqing's talent wasn't the most outstanding, but he was the first Jiang clan member to step into the heavenly man realm. Therefore, everyone had always been curious as to how he had comprehended the key to it. However, curiosity was just curiosity. Due to Jiang Zhengqing's annoying personality, no one had specifically asked him for advice. Who would have thought that he would actually take the initiative to say it today? In fact, how could Jiang Zhengqing be talented? He must have a screw loose in his head. When a normal person saw such a shocking heavenly anomaly, their first reaction would definitely be to avoid it. However, Jiang Zhengqing insisted on doing the opposite. No matter what kind of heavenly anomaly it was, he wanted to use this opportunity to train himself. His breakthrough stemmed from the spiritual energy tide that had appeared last time. It was just like how Yang Gui used the black iron-heavy sword to practice swordsmanship under the waterfall, increasing his strength through resisting the waterfall. When the spiritual energy tide appeared last time, Jiang Zhengqing just happened to be cultivating nearby. He felt that the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was especially turbulent, so he dived in without thinking and stepped into the heavenly man realm in one go. There was definitely danger. After all, the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was far superior to the outside world. If one's cultivation was insufficient or had an unstable foundation, they might suffer from chi deviation if they weren't careful. They might even explode and die because they couldn't withstand the enormous spiritual energy. However, for a cultivator like Jiang Zhengqing, who had been trapped in the heavenly man realm for many years due to the exhaustion of spiritual energy, how could this be dangerous? This was simply a great opportunity. Because his foundation had been tempered thousands of times, as long as there was enough spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he could condense a true golden core. In the past, the heavenly gate would always open with the spiritual energy tide. Everyone wanted to ascend to the great world through the heavenly gate, so they didn't realize at all. Even if they didn't pass through the heavenly gate, they could use this opportunity to break through to the heavenly man realm. Therefore, with Jiang Zhengqing as an example, everyone carefully flew into the center of the whirlpool. If the spiritual energy tide was compared to a cake, then Chun Shi used brute force to smash the cake into mud with one slap. Chapter 375. Under Jiang Zhengqing's lead, the Jiang clan's celestials plunged into the world-shaking waterspout. After that, the 300-plus celestials began to resist the power of the whirlpool while crazily absorbing the spiritual energy within it. Their bodies were like the earth in the desert. Due to the lack of water, they had already cracked and collapsed. After the heaven and earth spirit chi surged like a flood, their bodies seemed to have turned from cracked earth into fertile fields. The rain nourished the earth, causing the long dried-up desert to once again grow green sprouts. Everyone experienced a feeling that they had never felt before from this. Carefree. It was truly carefree. The rich and pure spiritual chi of heaven and earth was like a bottle of iced cola. The instant they drank it, they could clearly feel. An incomparably cool feeling continuously entered their throat, then passed through their internal organs, the major acupoints all over their body, and finally reached their limbs, bones, and the ends of their bodies. But regrettably, the tide of spiritual energy was not very strong to begin with. Thus, after the 300-plus celestials crazily devoured it like maggots, the waterspout shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. About half an hour later, the originally incomparably thick waterspout turned into a thin line of water. Then, it suddenly stopped rotating. Like a water ball that had been punctured, it collapsed in midair with a loud bang. Seawater continued to sprinkle down from the sky. The spiritual energy that had lost its restraints surged in all directions. Waves came one after another. In just a short while, everything had returned to normal. Just like that, it's over? Jiang Yuan Kuei sat cross-legged in midair. Even after the stormy waves had completely calmed down, he still had a feeling of endless aftertaste. One could not blame him for losing his composure. After all, this feeling was truly too refreshing. Too many people came today. There's not enough to share. All right, that's it then. Go back and properly enter seclusion for a while. Carefully savor the subtleties of this. You should be able to break through to celestial very soon. Seeing that everyone seemed to want to continue, Jiang Zhengqing, who had experienced it before, couldn't help but laugh proudly. After laughing for a while, Jiang Zhengqing suddenly realized a problem. Perhaps the old ancestor had already anticipated the crux of the matter. That was why he made such a big show of making an enemy out of Tiandu. The tidal wave had already receded. The Jiang clan's heavenly clansmen stood up and prepared to return to Daiyu Island. Everyone seemed to be too preoccupied with the feeling just now, so even Jiang Zhengqing didn't notice it. Not long after they left, a figure suddenly rose from the sea. This was a young man in his early 20s. He was wearing an extremely retro white robe, and his hair was tied up in a bun. Coupled with the aloof temperament that he inadvertently exuded, this young man simply looked like a talented scholar who had walked out of an ancient painting. But the slightly strange thing was this person clearly came out of the sea, but there was not a single drop of water on his body. Furthermore, he didn't even make any movements of stepping on the water. His body just floated straight up to the surface of the sea. When more than half of his body was out of the water, the young man walked out of the water step by step as if he was climbing a flight of stairs. Then, he stood 2 to 3 meters above the water. Master! Oh, Master, could it be that you've even calculated this step? That's why you let me stay in the lower realm alone? But if you leave, your disciple will feel terrible. Yuhuan Tianzuan is really something. It wasn't easy for me to find a voice transmission talisman in the Misty Pavilion. As soon as I opened it, I didn't even have time to tell you that I'm safe. He ordered me to teach that person a lesson. He even said that it was for the sake of Tiandu's reputation. That's easy for him to say. Even Senior Brother Baiyang wasn't a match for that person. How would I dare to provoke him? All right, I know even if you don't say it, I can't go against the orders of the Heavenly Venerable. On this vast and boundless sea, apart from the constantly rising waves, there was probably only blue sky and white clouds left. It was obviously so lonely that even a bird could not be seen, but this young man was still looking up as if he was talking to someone. Although you can't hear it, but I still want to say, Yuhuan Tianzuan, oh Yuhuan Tian'an, Wushu's abilities are weak. I really can't provoke that person, so I can only trouble you to come down and deal with him personally. As he spoke, the young man looked in the direction that Jiang Zhengqing and the rest left. Then, as if taking a stroll in the park, he slowly walked in that direction. There's an old saying, pick the soft persimmons to pinch. Apart from waving flags and shouting battle cries, I seem to be able to help you get rid of these eyesores. Forget it. No matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat, so that you won't find another reason to say that I'm disobedient and disrespectful. The young man's speed seemed slow, but in fact, it was extremely fast. Even though Jiang Zhengqing and the rest flew at full speed, they never left the young man's line of sight. And the scariest thing was Jiang Zhengqing and the rest were tailed, but among the 300 people, not a single one noticed this mysterious young man. They soon arrived at Daiyu Island. After Jiang Zhengqing and the rest entered the formation, they disappeared into thin air. At this moment, the young man looked at the vast ocean in front of him and couldn't help but mumble, "Is this the Big Dipper formation passed down from ancient times? No wonder I couldn't find the right place." As he spoke, the young man walked to the edge of the formation. Without seeing him do anything, a golden light screen appeared out of thin air. The young man stood outside the light screen and stretched his neck to look inside. Then he walked in with a smile on his face. Then Daiyu Island, which was like a paradise, was completely revealed in front of him. The young man had just arrived, so he couldn't find his way. He couldn't tell which island was the main one. Therefore, he went to the nearest island and strolled along the beach. After walking for a while, a group of children playing on the beach noticed him. The leader was a 17 or 18-year-old boy. The boy was quite alert. When he saw the young man's strange clothes, he frowned and called out to him, "Stop! Who are you?" Hearing that, the young man immediately stopped in his tracks. He first looked at the group of children in front of him, then smiled and replied, "Me? I'm Wushu. You wouldn't know me even if I told you, so I think I might as well not tell you. You're an outsider." The boy looked at him in shock. Not long ago, there was a muddled incident where an outsider suddenly climbed Qixia Peak. Therefore, Daiyu Island was under martial law recently. Therefore, when the boy came back to his senses, he immediately turned to his companion and said, "Little Six, go to the guard hall and tell them we found an outsider. Tell them to..." The boy didn't finish his sentence, because the young man suddenly attacked. He just waved his sleeve casually, and a huge force sent more than 10 children flying. After flying for more than 10 meters, the children fell heavily into the sea. No one knew if they were dead or alive. Note: Chapter 376. Even though he was facing a group of half-grown children, the man who called himself Wushu still attacked them. He did not seem to think that there was anything wrong with what he did. After sending the children flying into the sea, he even looked at the sea with disdain and muttered, "How rude." After that, he continued walking toward the depths of the island without looking back. As he went deeper into the island, he encountered more and more Jiang clan members along the way. However, regardless of whether they were male or female, old or young, Wushu would raise his sleeve and send them flying with a slap. The only thing worth rejoicing about was, judging from the state of these people after they fell, Wushu did not seem to have killed them. He only knocked them out. He did not walk very fast, but he walked straight toward the depths of the island. Therefore, he soon arrived at the square in the center of the island. This island was only one of the 17 sub-islands of Daiyu Island. The people on this island were also from the branch clan. Finally, after Wushu failed to knock everyone out with a slap, his actions had completely alarmed the entire Daiyu Island. The sudden sound of the enemy attack bell was like a muffled thunder that exploded in the sky above Daiyu Island. Bam! 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 Jiang Zhengqing and the others had just returned to Qixia Peak. At this moment, they were gathered together to discuss their experiences. After hearing the sound of the bell, one of the heavenly beings immediately stood up and said with a frown, "The forbidden bell of Xioshan Island has rung. I'll go back and take a look first." After saying that, the ancestor of the branch clan, Jiang Diheo, rushed out of the ancestral hall and flew towards Xioshan Island. After he left, Jiang Yuankuei looked at the others with a puzzled expression and asked, "Mr. Chen has already reached an agreement with the ancestor. I don't think he'll be an enemy of the Jiang clan anymore. But other than him, who else in the world would dare to cause trouble on Daiyu Island now? Jiang Yuan Kuei slowly scanned the entire place. However, everyone seemed to still be reminiscing about the spirit tide just now. Therefore, many of them even have faint smiles on their faces. However, they cannot be blamed for being arrogant. After all, this was the most powerful time in the past 1,000 years for the Jiang clan. More than 300 celestials. The last time Chun-Shi came to cause trouble, everyone was still in seclusion on Heron Island. So even Chun-Shi had not truly seen the Jiang clan's foundation. Now that everyone had just returned from the spirit chi tide, all the celestials were gathered at Serene Afterglow Peak, but there were still some ignorant fellows who dared to jump out and cause trouble. Isn't this the same as hanging an old man? Is he tired of living? Therefore, when Jiang Dihao got up and went to Xiushan Island, the others completely forgot about this matter and continued to talk about the topic of cultivation in 2s and 3s. Because in everyone's mind, Jiang Dihao alone was enough to suppress all the unbridled troublemakers. Xiushan Island was only a few kilometers away from the main island. Jiang Dihao soon arrived above Xiushan Island and saw the troublemaker. But that person didn't have any intention of hiding at all. He just stood in the middle of the square and slightly raised his head to look at him. Seeing this, Jiang Dihao immediately flew into a rage and scolded sternly. Which child dares to cause trouble on my Daiyu Island? Why aren't you surrendering now? Perhaps this old man can still spare your life. After saying that, Jiang Dihao flew directly toward that person, ready to take him down and slowly interrogate him. At this time, Wushu, who had been standing in the middle of the square in a daze, finally seemed to have seen something interesting. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, "I've been holding back for so long, and now I can finally move my muscles and bones." While muttering, Wushu raised his right hand. Then, a small yellow flag suddenly appeared in his hand. If one ignored the workmanship of the flag and the exquisite and complicated patterns on the flag, he really looked like a member of an elderly tour group, which was simply too low. Jiang Dihao didn't know why Wushu suddenly had a small flag in his hand, and he only thought that this young man was playing a trick. That was because he didn't know that there was actually a magic treasure in this world, called Summer Mustard Bag. Born like a mustard seed, there's a Sumeru, and the heart like a speck of dust. There's a big world inside. The Summer Mustard Bag, also known as the Interspatial Storage Bag, was a magic treasure that could only be refined by cultivators at the Dongshu stage. This magic treasure involved the profound meaning of the word void. It seemed to be only the size of a palm, but in reality, it could contain objects ranging from a few cubic meters to dozens of cubic meters. It was really a magical treasure that was necessary for traveling, killing, and arson. Chun-Shi used to have one, but unfortunately, he accidentally lost it on his way back. If Chun-Shi was here right now and saw the treasure in this person's hands with her own eyes, even if he was as powerful as he would no longer underestimate his opponent. Instead, he would use 120% of his strength to fight the next battle. This was a very simple principle. One could roughly judge a person's worth from the way they traveled, and it was the same for cultivators. Only cultivators at the Dongshu stage could refine the Sumeru mustard bag, and the materials needed were very rare. Naturally, it couldn't be something that could be found on the streets. Baihong didn't have it, and neither did Shui Xiang. However, this young man named Wushu had it. This also meant that no matter what his cultivation was, his status in the outside world was higher than Baihong's. Chun-Shi understood this principle, but Jiang Dihao didn't. Therefore, the moment he rushed towards Wushu, Wushu also waved the small yellow flag in his hand. At that moment, Jiang Dihao didn't sense any fluctuation of spiritual energy, so he was even a little curious about what this young man was doing. However, the next second, the whole ground cracked open. The floor of the square collapsed and shattered, and hundreds of earth spikes suddenly protruded from the ground. From afar, it looked like a hedgehog, and all the spikes on its body were aimed at Jiang Dihao in the air. Jiang Diheo didn't have time to react at all, and these hundreds of earth spikes all shot towards him. The speed of the earth spikes was very strange. Once they shot out, they covered the sky above the square. No! After a wail, Jiang Diheo's figure completely disappeared. The earth spikes turned into dust and leisurely sprinkled down, mixed with a particularly dazzling rain of blood. After the smoke and dust dispersed, this terrifying young man held the small flag, and then laughed and said to the Jiang clansmen who rang the forbidden bell, "Ring it again. Remember to ring it a little louder, or else I'm afraid they won't hear it." From beginning to end, his body didn't move at all. He just lightly waved the small flag in his hand, and with the power of the small flag, he instantly obliterated a celestial being. It was obvious that this small flag was also a magic treasure, but it was different from Bai Hong's flowing cloud sword and Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. The small flag in Wushu's hand had once appeared in the legends of Huaxia, and it had a well-known name, namely Chapter 377. The Central Wuji Apricot Flag. If one added the Eastern Green Lotus Flag, the Southern Floating Flame Flag, the Western White Cloud Boundary Flag, and the Northern Jinwu Eagle Flag, these 5 flags formed a set of killing weapons that had once appeared in the myths and legends of Huaxia, the Khanate 5-element flags. Ever since Chun Shi learned about the deeds of the ancient cultivators from the old man, he had a basic understanding of these myths and legends, and that was, these myths and legends were more or less based on evidence, so their reputation had been passed down from ancient times until now. Of course, the real Khanate 5-element flags was definitely not as exaggerated as the myths and legends described, but it was definitely considered an extremely powerful set of Dharma treasures. In addition, the Khanate 5-element flags was truly praiseworthy not because of its quality, but because it was a set. Because it was a set of Dharma treasures, not one. The Wuji Apricot flag was only one of them. It could be freely disassembled and combined. This was the advantage of a set of Dharma treasures, but at the same time, it was also an unavoidable disadvantage of a set of Dharma treasures. Based on Chun Shi's experience, after gathering all 5 flags, the Khanate 5-element flags could at least reach the quality of a supreme treasure, which was the same level as his Heaven Derivation Sword. But because it was not pure enough, the Khanate 5-element flags could never be compared to the Heaven Derivation Sword. But then again, the supreme treasure was still a supreme treasure. Even if the 5 flags were disassembled, just the Central Wuji Apricot flag alone should be able to reach the level of a high-grade spirit treasure. What was a spirit treasure? Above a Dharma treasure was a spirit treasure. When Chun Shi had just returned, he had used 3 inferior Guanyin statues to refine 3 defensive Dharma treasures. But in a real sense, these 3 Guanyin pendants did not reach the standard of a Dharma treasure at all. At best, they could only be considered the lowest level of inferior Dharma artifacts. After all, at that time, Chun Shi had no cultivation and no materials, so the Guanyin pendants that he forcibly refined would naturally not be good treasures. Dharma artifacts, Dharma treasures, spirit treasures, supreme treasures, and extremely rare Khanate supreme treasures. According to their quality, they could be divided into 9 grades. Grade 1 was the lowest, and Grade 9 was the highest. The reason why he didn't mention magic treasures before was because it was impossible to find the materials to refine magical weapons on Earth. Refining magical weapons was an extremely difficult task, not to mention magical weapons with many wonderful uses. Bai Hong's sword, Qing Wan's spear, and Shui Xiang's damas could all be considered as high-quality magic treasures. Bai Hong's sword was quite handy, so Chun Shi did not destroy it. Therefore, he chose to smelt Qing Wan's spear and use the smelted materials to refine a set of defensive magic equipment. In addition to Ninian's bracelet necklace, Chun Shi later gave Lin Xian a self-defense pendant. Of course, heavenly materials and earthly treasures were all unique. Therefore, after smelting the magic treasure and then using the raw materials to refine a new magic treasure, If new materials were not added during this period, then the quality of the new magic treasure would plummet after it was formed. For example, Qing Wan's spear was originally grade 8, but after being smelted by Chun Shi, the new necklace could only barely reach grade 5. And this was a manifestation of Chun Shi's considerable knowledge in refining weapons. Magic treasures were like weapons in the hands of ordinary people. The better the weapon, the stronger the combat power. Even if a child picked up an AK, he could easily kill a group of unarmed adults. It was precisely because of this. From the moment Wushu took out the central Wuji apricot yellow flag, Daiyu Island was destined to be set off a bloody storm. Dong, 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 dong. The rapid and loud forbidden bell rang through the sky again. This time, all the Jiang clan's people sitting in the ancestral hall were stunned. Jiang Diheo could not even handle such a small matter. Just now, the bell had only rung 9 times, which meant that someone had invaded and reinforcements were needed. But now, the bell rang like a storm, and it had rung a total of 36 times. This meant that the situation had deteriorated to the point where it was out of control, and the entire clan urgently needed to face it together. Let's go and take a look. This time, before Jiang Yuankuei could say anything, Jiang Zhengqing could not sit still anymore. After all, no matter what, he was still a member of the Jiang clan. No matter how much a family quarreled behind closed doors, they were still a family. Now that the Jiang clan was being trampled on, how could Jiang Zhengqing sit still and do nothing? After Jiang Zhengqing rushed out of the ancestral hall, the rest of the people reacted and quickly followed behind him, flying straight toward Xiushan Island. The Celestials were on patrol, hunting everywhere. Many of the Jiang clan's juniors were more or less trembling when they heard the forbidden bell ringing one after another. They were afraid that the enemy would suddenly appear in front of them. Thus, when they saw hundreds of their ancestors flying over the island, they immediately stood on the ground and cheered crazily, as if they had been injected with chicken blood. This scene deeply demonstrated the meaning of the military parade. A clan or even a country would only feel excited and proud when they displayed their strength in front of the people. The dignity of Daiyu Island, it would not allow anyone to trample on it. Jiang Zhengqing's speed was very fast, and he almost instantly arrived above Xiushan Island. The young man was still standing in the same place, looking up at the sky. Only Jiang Diheo was nowhere to be seen. But how sharp was Jiang Zhengqing's sense of smell? When he sensed that there was still a trace of blood in the air, Jiang Zhengqing was about to explode in anger. Obviously, Jiang Diheo had died in the hands of this person, so the 36 forbidden bells were rung on Xiushan Island. TSK. Arrogant brat die. Unlike the last time when he fought with Chun Shi, Jiang Zhengqing underestimated his opponent and did not even have the chance to show half of his strength before he was smashed into the ground by Chun Shi. This time, in a fit of rage, Jiang Zhengqing really showed his full strength. Therefore, when he let out a furious roar, the clothes on his body suddenly puffed up without any wind. His head of black hair also swayed crazily, as if he was in the eye of the storm. Surging true core energy gathered in his palms, and Jiang Zhengqing's hands suddenly became like 2 searchlights, exceptionally bright. Then he slapped his palm toward the young man on the ground from afar. True 6 trigrams formula, mountain breaking all, a ray of golden energy suddenly shot out from his palm, as if it was the Buddha's palm. At this moment, Wushu, who had been standing on the ground, looked as if he had seen something new. He squinted his eyes slightly, and then waved the yellow flag in his hand. When a yellow flag was waved, the ground shook. 2 extremely thick mud pillars suddenly emerged from the ground, and then turned into 2 extremely thick arms. From bottom to top, they directly rushed toward Jiang Zhengqing in the sky. Jiang Zhengqing did not expect this young man's cultivation level to be so high. The mountain breaking all that he had used all his strength only shattered a corner of the mud pillars, and did not even slow down the opponent's attack. The 2 mud pillars were like the arms of a giant, hard and flexible at the same time. Chapter 378. It was hard to describe what it was like. It was just a pile of soil mixed with sand and stones, but it was like a living creature that could move freely and pounce on its prey. Jiang Zhengqing was obviously playing the role of the prey. The mud pillars emerged from the ground and shot into the sky like poisonous snakes pouncing on their prey. They were incredibly fast. The strength of the mud pillars surprised Jiang Zhengqing. While he was in a daze, the mud pillars had already reached him. After Jiang Zhengqing reacted, he immediately retreated into the sky. But the scary thing was, the speed at which the two mud pillars rose was even faster than his flying speed. In a flash, the mud pillars had caught up with Jiang Zhengqing. After all, this was already the second time he had been chased to the point of fleeing in such a sorry state. Jiang Zhengqing could not help but feel angry when he thought of all the things that had happened to him after his breakthrough. He was a heavenly being after all. It was fine when he faced Mr. Chen's flying immortal sword. But now, he was being chased all over the sky by two mud pillars. Did they really think that he was a heavenly being and a paper tiger? Jiang Zhengqing decided not to dodge anymore. He was ready to take the attack head-on. In an instant, Jiang Zhengqing was like a god descending to earth. The golden light around him shone brightly, almost illuminating half of Xiushan Island. 6 trigram, calming mind, concealment of spirit and qi. The moment the protective shield appeared, 2 mud pillars, one on the left and one on the right, smashed into Jiang Zhengqing's body. Bang! A loud noise reverberated in the sky above Daiyu Island. The surging true core dispersed in all directions due to the violent collision, causing a strong gust of wind to blow across Xiushan Island. Wu Xiu stood calmly on the ground and looked up at the situation from afar. He could not help but smile faintly. They were too weak. He did not even need to do anything. The power of the Wuji apricot yellow flag alone was enough to massacre the entire Daiyu Island. Wu Xiu thought about whether he should speed up as he turned to look at the heavenly beings of the Jiang clan. But just as he was about to wave the apricot yellow flag again, Jiang Zhengqing's slightly hurried roar suddenly rang out. This kid's Dharma treasure is too powerful. Retreat, retreat, retreat. It wasn't difficult to discern that his voice clearly carried a trace of shock and terror. Obviously, he was terrified by the might of the Wuji apricot yellow flag. Jiang Zhengqing had quite a bit of prestige in the clan. After hearing his incessantly trembling shout, the Jiang clan celestials naturally did not dare to rashly advance. They could only hurriedly retreat several miles. At this time, Jiang Zhengqing turned into a stream of light and flew out of the square, rushing back to the crowd. If it wasn't for the ancestor bestowing me with a protective magic treasure a few days ago, I'm afraid I would have been dead by now. After Jiang Zhengqing safely returned to Jiang Yunkuei's side, he panted heavily and said to Jiang Yunkuei. As he spoke, Jiang Zhengqing even passed a jade pendant to Jiang Yunkuei. This jade pendant was a protective magic treasure passed down from ancient times. If Jiang Yin hadn't been the first to break through to the celestial being realm, the old ancestor Jiang Yin wouldn't have given him this jade pendant. But now, he hadn't even warmed up the jade pendant when 4 or 5 extremely clear cracks appeared on it. Clearly, it was on the verge of breaking apart. The might of a single attack was actually so terrifying. At this time, if Jiang Yunkei still didn't understand the seriousness of the matter, then he would truly be the clan chief for nothing. Therefore, after exchanging a glance with Jiang Zhengqing, Jiang Yunkei abruptly raised his right hand and shouted, "The enemy is here. Everyone, please form the Yinyang 6 directions formation with me." After saying that, the Jiang clan celestials immediately formed groups of 6 and surrounded Xiushan Island Square in all directions. Over 300 celestials. How magnificent of a scene would that be? But Wuxiu acted as if he was watching a monkey show. Even though he was surrounded, there was still a faint smile on his face. When the golden light of the serene afterglow peak soared into the clouds and the heavenly stars formation was completely activated, Wushu slowly flew into the air under the gazes of the crowd. At this moment, the entire crowd was silent. Jiang Yuankui did not say anything. While everyone was waiting in formation, they were also silently examining the mysterious young man in front of them. Finally, Wushu was the first to speak, breaking the silence. I am the Divine General of Tiandu, Wushu. Under the orders of Yuhuan Tianzuan, I have specially come to condemn you all. No one answered him, because when they heard the two words Tiandu, all kinds of complicated expressions appeared on their faces. Wushu was not in a hurry to continue speaking. He only slowly swept his gaze over the crowd. But those who were swept by his gaze involuntarily lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. At this moment, Wushu was simply like Kangxi in disguise. When he announced his name, everyone was stunned by his identity. Tiandu. For the Jiang clan's clansmen, that was a distant place, a place that they yearned for day and night. But now, under the lead of their ancestor, they took the initiative to go against Tiandu. Wasn't this a rebellion? You are merely descendants of sinners, but the divine ancestor thought of the bitter cold of the lower realm. So he spared you all and allowed you to ascend to the upper realm. In the blink of an eye, the divine ancestor has already passed away. You all do not know how to cherish the divine ancestor's kindness. Instead, you all think of ways to destroy the foundations of the divine ancestor and prevent the divine ancestor from opening. This crime is unforgivable. When Wushu was alone, he would always talk nonsense like a crazy person. That was why their teacher always said that he would not grow up and was far from Baihong. But when he was serious, his body would erupt with a powerful aura that was enough to suffocate people. He just silently floated in the air. Every word he said was like a heavy hammer, smashing into everyone's chest. Everyone lowered their heads in silence. They were all waiting for their ancestor to speak, but for some reason, their ancestor did not do anything today. Only Jiang Zhengqing. After taking a deep look at the jade pendant in his hand, he spat at Wu Su angrily. Then he scolded sternly, "Bah, arrogant brat. After calling us sinners every time you open your mouth, dare I ask what our Jiang clan has done wrong?" Hearing this, Wushu chuckled. Just as he was about to reply, Jiang Zhengqing continued, "Don't talk to me about the upper and lower realms. I have seen all the changes in the world. In the past, when Tiandu was strong, the Jiang clan could only become sinners and be trapped in this bitter cold. Didn't you all look down on the lower realm? Why are you here today? I think you know that too. Things are different now. Jinling's jade tree is famous. Qinhuai's waterside pavilion blooms early, but who knew that it would disappear so easily? I saw him build a vermilion tower, I saw him host guests, and I saw him collapse. I think you all are grasshoppers after autumn. You won't be able to jump around for long." Hearing this, the smile on Wu Su's face disappeared. After coldly looking at Jiang Zhengqing, Wushu raised the apricot yellow flag in his hand again. Seeing this, the Jiang clan immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. As long as Jiang Yuankui gave the order, they would attack at the same time. They had to kill him instantly. Don't tell me you all really think that destroying the five-directional holy palace and extracting the spiritual energy foundation can stop the gate of heaven from opening? That's wishful thinking. How foolish. Today, I will say this because of what you all have done today. When the gate of heaven reopens, it will be the time when this world will be plunged into misery and suffering. When autumn comes on the 8th day of the 9th month, all flowers will be killed. Chapter 379. Xiushan Island was in a mess. 300 celestial beings stood in formation. Everyone stared at the young man in the sky above the square from afar. Divine General. After hearing his last sentence, Jiang Zhengqing knew that he couldn't let him continue. There was no point in saying more. If a random Divine General was enough to make everyone cower in fear, wouldn't the Jiang clan go for wool and come home shorn? Therefore, Jiang Zhengqing hesitated for a while. Then, a fierce look flashed across his face. He walked past Jiang Yuan and ordered everyone, "Formation." In that instant, the mountains rumbled, the valleys responded, and the wind blew. Dust swirled, and flags fluttered. How magnificent was the sight of 300 celestial beings. No matter how arrogant Wushu was, facing such a large number of enemies, he had to be on full alert. For the first time, his body showed signs of true yuan fluctuation. Attack! Jiang Zhengqing didn't give Wushu too much time to prepare. After giving the order, he ordered everyone to attack with all their might. The surging Zhen Yuan gushed toward Wushu like a torrential flood. Seeing this, Wushu did not have any intention of running away, because at this moment, he was the divine general of Tiandu. He represented Tiandu to punish the sinners. If he ran away, where would Tiandu's face be? He could not back down from this battle. Come on, let me take a look. What gave you the courage to go against Tiandu? Wushu was so angry that his hair and beard fluttered. He roared into the sky. The yellow flag in his hand was like a balloon. It expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, he quickly took out a pill from his summer mustard seed bag and stuffed it into his mouth. Xianyang's snow-melting pill. This pill was a 9th-grade spirit pill. Its effect was that when a cultivator burned their essence blood, the effect of the essence blood would be greatly enhanced. This would allow the cultivator to explode with power far greater than before. The 9th-grade Central Wuji apricot yellow flag in one hand and the 9th-grade Xianyang snow-melting pill in the other. Wushu's combat power was not inferior to Chen Shi's. Therefore, just as the Jiang clan's attack was about to arrive, the yellow flag in Wushu's hand exploded with a dazzling yellow light. The light was so bright that it almost dyed the entire sky. The 5-direction flags, Earth is supreme. Heaven Empress Earth, Heaven Empress, Heaven Pure will not fail. With a wave of the flag, the entire Earth trembled. Countless mud pillars suddenly extended from the ground and turned into a huge mud wall surrounding Wushu. The attacks of the Jiang clan's celestials all landed on the Earth wall. Boom, 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 boom. Dust flew everywhere, and sand and gravel flew everywhere. Huge explosions sounded in the sky above Shoshan Island one after another. That scene, it was like an air raid during World War II. The rumbling did not stop for even a moment. In truth, Jiang Zhengqing was well aware that the other party's strength far surpassed his own. Therefore, if they did not make use of their numerical advantage, they would have no hope at all. Therefore, after the first round of attacks, Jiang Zhengqing didn't wait for everyone to catch their breath before he roared fiercely, "Don't stop. Beat him up. Even if we have to destroy Shoshan Island today, we must bury this bastard here. Jiang family, prosper without decline." At this moment, the ancestral 6-trigram incantation of the Jiang clan could be considered to have completely bloomed. They were the origin of the necromancers, and also the masters of the Tao of sorcery. Therefore, all kinds of 5 elemental sorcery were like a storm, smashing towards the center of the square. One round after another, as if there would never be a day of rest. Finally, some people had to stop temporarily because they had used up too much energy. However, they stopped in the air and gasped for breath. Because Jiang Zhengqing was a level higher than everyone else, when everyone had no choice but to stop, he was still crazily attacking the center of the square. The dust raised by the explosions blocked everyone's sight. From afar, the entire sky above Shoshan Island was filled with a layer of dust, as if a sandstorm was coming. Second granduncle stopped. Seeing Jiang Zhengqing continuously attacking like a madman, Jiang Yuankui quickly reached out to stop him. Although Jiang Yuankui did not want to believe that this person would be so stupid as to stand in the center and let them attack as they wished. But the truth was right in front of him. There were no signs of true essence fluctuations in the air above the square. However, out of caution, Jiang Yuankui did not immediately go forward to check the situation. Instead, he continued to wait patiently outside. Under Jiang Yuankui's persuasion, Jiang Zhengqing finally stopped. However, after he took 2 deep breaths, He frowned and said with a serious face, "UNK, I think something is wrong," as expected. Before Jiang Zhengqing finished speaking, a burst of bright light suddenly exploded in the center of the square. Immediately after, Wushu's voice was heard again. "You guys, is that all you've got?" Suddenly, a gust of wind came from nowhere. After the smoke dissipated, Wushu's figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes again. "Could it be that you guys have been in the lower realm for too long, so you don't even know how to fight? If that's the case, why don't you just bind yourselves and ask me to be lenient?" If Wushu was a fully armed modern special force, then the Jiang family was simply a primitive warrior who only knew how to rely on brute force to fight. After all, it was because the earth had been desolate for too long that civilization had degenerated to a primitive society. Spells, pills, talismans, refining weapons, setting up formations, and poison. Other than the spell inheritance that had not been cut off, what was left of the Jiang family? It could be said that this was a war between a modern civilization and a primitive society. In fact, the Wuji apricot yellow flag was not a killing magic treasure at all. Instead, it was mainly used for defense like Shui Xiang silk satin. Therefore, when the Jiang family attacked, Wushu only needed to hide under the protection of the Wuji apricot yellow flag. If the enemy advances, I will retreat. If the enemy stays, I will disturb. If the enemy is tired, I will attack. If the enemy retreats, I will chase. The 16 words formula for guerrilla warfare, even in the immortal cultivation world, was an absolutely correct tactic. Unfortunately, there is no one in the entire Jiang family who knew about magic treasures, so everyone could only waste their energy. Therefore, it was time for Wushu to show his power. He waved the Wuji apricot yellow flag in his hand, and 4 giant natives made of mud suddenly emerged from the ground, then attacked the Jiang family members in all directions. With the natives holding back, Wushu completely transformed into a war god, holding the apricot yellow flag and rushing towards Jiang Zhengqing's direction. To catch bandits, first catch the leader. Seeing Wushu's aggressive momentum, Jiang Zhengqing and Jiang Yuankue could not help but be shocked. Even if they were at their peak, they would not be able to fight against Wushu. Now that they had lost more than half of their strength, how would they dare to fight Wushu head-on? Without even needing to communicate, the two flew in different directions, preparing to temporarily avoid the attack. Seeing this, Wushu could not help but laugh. "Run? What do you run to?" As his voice fell, Wushu waved the apricot yellow flag in his hand and directly sent out 2 waves of true origin towards the back of the two. Just at this critical juncture, a wave of true origin suddenly shot out from the forest below, like a sharp arrow, and directly shot towards Wushu in the sky. Jiang Zhengqing felt something strange behind him. Looking back, he just happened to see that wave of true origin pass through Wushu's body and drew a thin line of blood in the air. Jiang Zhengqing widened his eyes and only felt that his mind was blank. Chapter 380. The old ancestor came. Once those words were said, everyone seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. A trace of indescribable excitement immediately appeared on their faces. After all, the old ancestor Jiang Yin was the current spiritual totem of the Jiang clan. Now that the Jiang clan raised the flag and wanted to become enemies with Tiandu, everyone was fighting fiercely. Only the old ancestor was nowhere to be seen, so it was inevitable that everyone would have doubts in their hearts. They could clearly choose to ascend to the higher realms, so why did they have to go against Tiandu? What was the reason? In reality, everyone knew very well why the old ancestor did this. But as long as the old ancestor did not appear, this question would always linger like a nightmare, forever shrouding everyone's heart. The most frightening thing in a battle was to lose morale. Luckily, the old ancestor finally appeared. The spiritual totem was erected again, and everyone's heart was filled with an extremely strong fighting spirit, causing the slightly dispirited morale to instantly soar to the peak. The majestic Jiang clan, flourishing without decline, The giant natives summoned by Wushu had no life to begin with, and each one of them had to face the encirclement of dozens of celestials. Thus, under the continuous encirclement of everyone, the natives could only collapse one by one, turning into a pile of rubble and mud that fell to the ground again. Then, the celestials of the Jiang clan who had freed up their hands immediately turned towards Wushu's direction, firmly surrounding him in the center. Back to Wushu's side. As one of the best 1,000-year-old go in Chun Shi's heart, Jiang Yin was indeed very patient. He already knew everything that happened on the island, but he still did not immediately stand out to lead everyone to besiege Wushu. Instead, he allowed everyone to suffer a huge loss at Wushu's hands. He was go and also waiting, just waiting for the moment Wushu let down his guard, and then launching a fatal attack. For a smart person, 10,000 meaningless attacks were clearly not as effective as a single fatal attack. Just in terms of cultivation, Jiang Yin, who had lived for over 1,000 years, was clearly stronger than Wushu. Thus, when he steeled his heart to launch a sneak attack, even with the protection of the Wuji apricot yellow flag, Wushu was still unable to completely dodge the attack. But fortunately, Wu Su reacted very quickly. Furthermore, his clothes were defensive magic treasures. Therefore, the killing move that Jiang Yin had been holding back for a long time only managed to cut off a piece of flesh from his waist. Immortal cultivators did have the ability to regenerate broken limbs, but this takes time to recover slowly. It is impossible to be like Wolverine and Deadpool, whose bodies were clearly chopped into minced meat, but it didn't take long for them to return to their original appearance. That was unscientific. For immortal cultivators, the body was merely a vessel, while the soul was the absolute core. However, once they lost the protection of the vessel, their divine soul would gradually weaken until it completely disappeared from the world. Therefore, for high-level immortal cultivators, the physical body was also an extremely important part of them. It was absolutely impossible for them to abandon it easily. This was the first time Wushu had suffered such a serious injury. Wushu lowered his head and looked at the wound on his waist. His face was as cold as a poker card. He silently took out a healing pill from his sumru mustard seed bag and swallowed it. Then, he turned his gaze to the forest below. Subsequently, a figure slowly flew into the air under Wushu's gaze. Jiang Yuan Kuei took a closer look. After seeing the person's appearance, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Feng Yin, why are you here?" Because of the previous act of snatching the Adumbra flower, Jiang Feng Yin had been punished by the old ancestor to meditate in the dry pool, so Jiang Yuanke didn't expect to see his son here. However, Jiang Zhengqing immediately figured out the reason, so he immediately cupped his hands and saluted. Zhengqing greets the old ancestor. After hearing this, Jiang Yuanke was stunned on the spot. At this time, he finally reacted, Jiang Yin, Jiang Feng Yin. It was only a difference of one word, but their identities were worlds apart. Jiang Feng Yin was a direct descendant of the Jiang family, so the only similarity between the two was probably the blood flowing in their bodies. Bloodline possession. It must be a bloodline possession. The old ancestor forcibly took away Jiang Feng Yin's body and erased his divine soul at the same time. Yuan Ke, the Jiang family has reached a critical moment of life and death. This old man has to do this. If I don't do this, not only Feng Yin, but even you and the tens of thousands of Jiang family members on Daiyu Island will die in the hands of this person. I hope you can figure this out and don't hold a grudge because of this. Jiang Feng Yin flew to the side of the two, then said this to Jiang Yuankue through voice transmission. After hearing this, Jiang Yuankue looked up to the sky and screamed in extreme pain. Then, as if he had gone mad, he turned around and flew in the direction of Qixia Peak. Yuankue? Seeing this, Jiang Zhengqing stepped forward to stop Jiang Yuankue. However, before he could turn around, Jiang Feng Yin directly called out to him. Zhengqing, the enemy is right in front of us. Don't be distracted. After this matter, I will explain to him. I only hope that Yuankue can understand my painstaking efforts, since the old ancestor had said so. Jiang Zhengqing naturally couldn't say anything more, so he could only nod and respond, yes. The three of them seemed to have said a lot, but in fact, they used the secret method of voice transmission. Chapter 382. After explaining the situation to Qin Ruoying, Chunxi set off for Daiyu Island. As soon as he got close to the waters around Daiyu Island, the sky suddenly darkened. Thunder and lightning intertwined, and torrential rain poured down. Thick fog rolled and rose from the surface of the sea, and the sea looked as if a tsunami was approaching. The waves surged over one after another, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were screaming, charging, and fighting. From time to time, waves soared into the sky, creating splashes of water that were more than 10 feet high. It was a spectacular sight that could not be described with words. Because the Jiang family had activated the protective array, even she could not see what was going on inside. When he forcibly broke open a crack in the array and was about to enter, a surging and violent wave of spirit Qi suddenly surged out from the crack. Shi only sensed it briefly, but he frowned on the spot. This was the remnant aura after the great battle. At the same time, there were two distinct waves of true origin in this aura. This meant that the battle had reached its climax, and both parties did not even bother to restrain themselves. That was why so much spirit Qi had leaked out. She could only hope that the old man could hold on for a while longer. After all, he was not here to collect the Jiang family's corpse. Thinking of this, Shi couldn't help but speed up his movements. With a flash, his entire person directly entered the grand formation. As soon as he entered the array, he saw a field of wildfire, thick smoke, and dilapidated walls. Daiyu Island, where was the beautiful and spectacular sight that Chunxi had seen when he first came here? Xiushan Island, which was located at the westernmost tip of Daiyu Island, had half a mountain cut off. Many Jiang family members who were lucky enough to survive could only hold on to broken logs and cry in the sea. The island was shattered, and the mountain was flattened. The wildfire lit up the forest, and thick smoke filled the sky. The 17 islands of Daiyu Island, there were only one or two that had not been affected by the Great Battle. It could be said that heaven and earth had lost their color, and all living things were crying out in grief. It was a scene of misery and suffering. Rumble, rumble. The battle was not over yet. Every time Wuxiu and Jiang Yin clashed, the shockwaves produced by the collision of their Zhen Yuan would instantly destroy everything around them. Thunder continued to rumble, and the earth trembled violently. This scene was very similar to the carpet bombing tactics of World War II. Thus, compared to the Jiang clan's people in the sky, the Jiang clan's people with shallow cultivations below were the ones who were truly living in fear. They would never know when the next wave of attacks would befall them. They watched as their loved ones fell one after another in the aftermath of the Great Battle, or were directly smashed into meat paste by the dissipating true essence. The pitiful Jiang clansmen could only hug each other and cry bitterly. The Celestials couldn't protect them, and the old ancestor couldn't save them. Who else could save them? Blood flowed like a river, and corpses piled up into mountains. Tens of thousands of people were in grief, their wails shaking the heavens. Looking at the tragic scenes in front of him, Shi, who was used to living in a civilized society, felt a little uncomfortable for a moment. Although he had only returned for a little over a year, he felt that he had been away from that cruel world for far too long. Until this moment, he finally found the feeling he had back then. The battle between Yuanying was indeed more terrifying than he had imagined. Both of them were experts. Experts naturally didn't need to be compassionate, nor did they need to be overcautious. However, looking at the grief-stricken mortals below, combined with what he had seen and heard during this period of time, Shi couldn't help but have a question in his mind. Strength and weakness were relative. Compared to humans, ants were extremely insignificant. But compared to immortal cultivators, what was the difference between an ordinary person and an ant? At this moment, Chunshi suddenly had an epiphany and completely forgot where he was. He actually fell into deep thought just like that. Strength was divided into strong and weak. All living things were equal. Even if they were as insignificant as ants, as a life between heaven and earth, they should receive the least amount of respect. In front of humans, ants were insignificant. But in front of planets like Tianxian or Earth, weren't humans also insignificant and insignificant? Any wave of tides was enough to affect all life on this planet. The dinosaurs were extinct. The ancient immortal cultivators were lucky enough to escape. In front of heaven and earth, all living things were equal. Whether it was the auntie selling vegetables on the street or him, the divine Lord Dawn, what was the difference between the two in essence? Cultivation was a kind of detachment. In that case, what level of cultivation did he have to reach before he could be considered an absolute expert? Chunshi floated quietly in midair. Suddenly, his heart trembled violently. Immediately after, a feeling of enlightenment rushed into Chunshi's heart. Through the accumulated tribulations of the mystifying scripture, he was enlightened in an instant, understanding one's heart and seeing one's nature. Enlightenment. He hadn't had this feeling for a long time. Under such circumstances, under such conditions, he could actually have an epiphany. One had to know that epiphany was a very mysterious thing. It had nothing to do with cultivation, but it was extremely important and would be of great help to cultivation. Although he didn't comprehend the true essence of the word void, for Chunshi, this was already a great blessing. He even had a vague feeling that he might not be far from the insightful emptiness realm. Just one more step. As long as he understood the word void, he would be able to step into the insightful emptiness realm. Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but be overjoyed. He subconsciously raised his head to the sky and let out a long howl. His voice was full of joy, but this joy was obviously somewhat out of place with the atmosphere on Daiyu Island. Wushu and Jiangyan's 5 senses were very sharp. Even though they were fighting fiercely, both of them noticed this extremely discordant howl. Mr. Chun, when Jiang Yin saw the figure in the distance clearly, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. One had to know that Jiang Yin had been reincarnated through possession. After several rounds of fierce fighting, his body was already somewhat overwhelmed and could explode and die at any time. When that time came, who in this huge Jiang clan would be able to stop Wushu for a moment? Therefore, after seeing Chun Shi's figure, Jiang Yin was suddenly very excited. It had to be said that the 3 words Mr. Chun did indeed have a strange magic power. After Jiang Yin blurted out these 3 words in a moment of excitement, the scene became strangely quiet. The Jiang clan's celestials all looked in the direction their ancestor was pointing. Even Wushu. He actually stopped fighting temporarily and turned to look in Chunshi's direction. In an instant, Chunshi had become the focus of everyone's attention. Seeing this, Chunshi suddenly came back to his senses and finally remembered why he was here. Sorry, I'm late. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to take half a step into the Deva realm at such a young age. With such aptitude, if placed in the heavenly Jade domain, no matter which sect, he would be listed as a core disciple. Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but come up with a guess. Could it be? The old man had predicted that with the revival of spirit Qi, there was a perfect candidate for possession. So he simply took advantage of this opportunity to seize Jiang Fingyin's body openly. He trapped himself in the soul crystal and tortured himself for thousands of years, just to welcome the glory of tomorrow. What a vicious heart. What a deep mind. People who were vicious to others were not scary. People who were vicious to themselves were the ones who were truly scary. Chunshi's mind was in a whirl, but his face did not show any abnormality. His conversation with Jiang Yin was short, so it did not take up too much time. After saying that, Chunshi turned his gaze to Wushu. After all, This was his real enemy. It had to be said that the atmosphere above Dayu Island was somewhat stifling. Wuxi was still holding 2 flags in his hands, flying alone not far away from the Jiang family. A dignified divine general of Tiandu was now covered in injuries, and he no longer had the sage-like aura he had before. However, even Wushu's body emitted a sense of exhaustion, let alone the Jiang clan's people. Chun-Shi only took a cursory glance and found that the Jiang family's pride of 300 divine warriors had been reduced to just over 100. Moreover, they all looked dispirited, and there was even some despair and fear in their eyes. It was obvious that the Jiang family had paid a heavy price in this battle. It could be said that they had suffered a great loss. If it wasn't for his appearance that made the 2 sides stop fighting for a while, then it would not be long before. Then, Dayu Island would be completely wiped off the map by Wushu. All right, you guys go and rest. Leave this to me. Chun-Shi twisted his neck, and after saying that, he directly flew forward a short distance, leaving himself to face Wushu alone. This action clearly showed his attitude. Swap. From now on, Wushu's enemy was no longer the Jiang family, but him, Chun-Shi, Mr. Chun. Actually, Chun-Shi's idea was very simple. No matter what secrets were hidden, when the spirit energy tide appeared, Ying would feel dizzy and sick. It was also because Ying would feel dizzy and sick that he had to avoid this situation. How could he avoid it? Wasn't it just to disperse the spirit energy tide? Other than that, whether it was Tiandu or the Jiang family, it had nothing to do with him. In short, as long as he was on Earth, the spirit energy tide would not appear for a day. But if the spirit energy tide did not appear, how could the heavenly gate open? How would the generals of Tiandu descend on Earth? This was simply a paradox. Chapter 384. Under Chun-Shi's watch, Wushu suddenly turned into a cloud of dust and dissipated in front of everyone's eyes. Chun-Shi had come all the way here and had barely exchanged a few words. How could he allow this guy to escape so easily? Therefore, the moment Wushu's figure dissipated, Chun-Shi drew his sword. As soon as the sword was drawn, the sky suddenly darkened. The long sword turned invisible, and the twilight in the sky silently closed. Heaven and earth were silent. It was as if only one person, one sword, and one grain of sand were left. This was the earth escape technique of the 5 elements. It was also the escape technique that Wushu was proud of. As soon as this technique was drawn, Wushu's entire body was like thousands of dust and gravel in the air. It was invisible and unfathomable. But it was a pity Wushu had underestimated Chun-Shi's strength. If he had left before Chun-Shi arrived, Dayu Island would have been like his back garden. He could come and go as he pleased. Since Chun-Shi was already here, it was destined that he would not be able to be as relaxed as before. Chun-Shi still used the first move of the Moonlight Sword technique. The sword hid the void. Before the sword was drawn, the sword aura was hidden and not released. As soon as the sword was drawn, it was like a long river hanging upside down, soaring into the sky and into the clouds. Its speed was so fast that it was simply shocking. Jiang Zhengqing was completely stunned by this sword. Even when he was chased by Chun-Shi's flying sword all over the sky before, he did not feel that Mr. Chun was much stronger than he was. Until he saw this sword, Jiang Zhengqing finally understood the gap between himself and Mr. Chun. It was like the gap between heaven and earth. The move was still the same move. However, in the past year or so, Chun-Shi's condition had improved qualitatively. The demeanor of a divine lord was completely displayed at this moment. After Chun-Shi slashed out with her sword, the sword light suddenly transformed into thousands of identical sword shadows as it flew through the air. These sword shadows didn't look very real, as if they didn't really exist in this world, so people mistakenly thought that. These sword shadows were only the refraction of light, which was why they formed the illusion of one real sword in 10,000 fake swords. It looked like a kaleidoscope. Of all the people present, only Jiang Yin knew what was good for him. Marvelous, truly marvelous. Jiang Yin let out a heartfelt sigh. At this time, the sword gleam and the thousands of sword shadows had already arrived at Wushu's previous location. One grain of sand, one world, one leaf, one Bodhi. Since Wushu was trying to split himself into thousands of clones and escape from Chunxi's sight using the Earth Escape technique, Chunxi decided to use the Earth Escape technique. In that case, Chunxi could only unleash 10,000 swords simultaneously, using the real sword to lock onto Wushu's chi dynamic and the virtual sword to sweep through all things. Not a single grain of sand was spared. Bang! There was a silent and violent explosion. It was as if a piece of the sky had been forcefully ripped out, leaving a strange vacuum zone in the sky above Daiyu Island. In this vacuum, there was no air, no dust, and even the sunlight seemed to be frozen. And this was clearly the real, a sword concealing the void. Crack! Suddenly, the sky cracked open like a broken mirror. The light in that position began to distort, and a figure appeared out of thin air in the originally empty sky. First, it was a pair of legs, then thighs, waist, chest, neck, and finally, head. Wushu's figure slowly appeared. Wushu stared at his own body with wide eyes, and his face suddenly revealed an expression as if he had seen a ghost. To put it bluntly, this was the ultimate life-saving technique that he relied on to survive. How could it be so easily broken by Chunxi? At this moment, Wushu was really panicking. It's still so early, my daughter hasn't even finished school. Why are you in such a hurry? After twirling his sword around, Chunxi said to him with a smile. Wushu was silent. After taking a deep look at Chunxi, he said with a solemn expression, Impossible. It's impossible for someone like you to appear in the lower realm. Where did you come from? Wushu looked at Chunxi with a strange expression. But after Chunxi heard this, she only smiled and didn't care at all. Me? I came from Shangjing. He was born and raised on Earth, so why would he need to explain himself to anyone? Wushu did not believe him, but he did not argue with him. Instead, he quietly took out the white-boned spirit-summoning banner from his Sumeru mustard bag. It seemed like he had accepted his fate. Since he could not run, he could only fight. Seeing this, Chunxi nodded with a smile and signaled him to make his move. The battle was about to begin. The members of the Zhang family held their breaths and looked at them nervously. They had already changed from participants to spectators. However, just when everyone thought that Wushu was going to start fighting, Wushu suddenly did something that shocked everyone. After he took out the white-boned spirit-summoning banner, he slapped himself hard on the chest, causing himself to spit out a mouthful of blood. The blood stained the banner, making the patterns on the banner even more eerie. Blood sacrifice? After seeing Wushu use his blood to dye the white-boned spirit-summoning banner red, even she could not help but stop smiling. His expression became more serious because of this. After all, the blood that Wushu spat out was not simple. That was his blood essence. Since cultivators could unleash power beyond normal by burning their blood essence, then similarly, if one used their blood essence to feed a magic treasure, it would be able to unleash power beyond its current level. Therefore, when Wushu's blood essence splashed onto the banner, a terrifying murderous aura exploded from the white-boned spirit-summoning banner. In an instant, the Wushu flag was like a drop of ink in water. Countless black smoke gushed out from the flag and spread rapidly. The black smoke quickly covered the sky. At this moment, Wushu's voice sounded from the black smoke. You're giving me 3 moves, right? If that's the case, I won't be polite with you. Wushu is here. Please enlighten me, mister. Following Wushu's roar, a surge of true essence surged out of the black smoke. Due to his previous promise, Chunxi could only use his sword to protect himself. His body lit up with a golden light, wanting to use it to block Wushu's attack. However, the violent impact that Chunxi imagined did not come. In his perception, the true essence in Wushu's body was like air in a balloon. Because it was so large, even the balloon burst. Then, the true origin energy surged out in all directions in a ring shape. Chun-Shi was stunned, because he did not understand what Wushu's move was. Could it be that he was here to perform a fairy-scattering flower? Chun-Shi was puzzled. Suddenly, he shuddered, and then suddenly came back to his senses. No, this guy is trying to escape. This time, it was really Chun-Shi's turn to be nervous. Not to mention anything else. If he really let Wushu escape from under his nose, he would lose a lot of face thinking of this. Chun-Shi immediately waved the sword in his hand. The sword light immediately shot out like the rising sun. Thousands of golden clusters of light instantly dispersed the black smoke and illuminated the entire sky. Unfortunately, Chun-Shi's reaction was still a beat slower. After the feint, Wushu had long disappeared from his sight. Since the elder ancestor had expressed his opinion, no matter how uncomfortable everyone was, they could only bow to Chun-Shi and say, "Thank you for saving our lives, mister." Seeing this, Chun-Shi also said politely with an awkward expression, "Everyone, please rise. It's just a small matter. Everyone, there's no need to be so polite." Hearing this, Jiang Yin straightened his body, then lamented with a pained expression, "After this battle, the Jiang clan's vitality has been greatly damaged." Looking at this devastated Daiyu Island, this old man's heart aches even more. All the sins were caused by this old man. This old man only hopes that this decision is not wrong. Otherwise, when this old man goes to the netherworld in the future, how can I face the ancestors of the Jiang clan? I, Jiang Yin, am the sinner of the Jiang clan. Jiang Yin was filled with grief and indignation. In a moment of agitation, 2 streams of turbid tears fell from the old man's eyes. Looking at his bloodshot eyes, even Chun-Shi, an outsider, could not bear to see it, let alone these reborn juniors of the Jiang clan. Elder ancestor, you're right. Your decision is also for the sake of revitalizing the Jiang clan, and also for the sake of establishing the supreme glory of our clan in the future. The Jiang clan has not been defeated. As long as we are still alive, even if we are smashed to pieces, we will fight for a brand new future for the Jiang clan under your leadership. For the Jiang clan, yes, even if we are smashed to pieces, we will not retreat even half a step. F***CK, the divine general of Tiandu. In the future, if anyone dares to mention the word ascension in front of me, I will definitely not forgive him. From today onwards, the Jiang clan will definitely be at odds with Tiandu. Irreconcilable. Irreconcilable. When everyone saw Jiang Yin cry, the depression in their hearts immediately turned into endless grief and indignation. Suddenly, their morale was even higher than before. Chun-Shi stared dumbfoundedly at the scene in front of him. Everyone surrounded Jiang Yin and made bold statements. Jiang Yin, on the other hand, occupied Jiang Fingyin's young body. His face revealed an expression of great comfort. The more he looked at it, the more awkward he felt. Therefore, Chun-Shi couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. This old fellow was really ruthless. He actually managed to win back the hearts of the people with just a few words. Although he didn't know the real purpose of Jiang Yin, Chun-Shi was now convinced by this old fellow from the bottom of his heart. No matter what Jiang Yin did, at least, he dared to raise the flag and become enemies with Tiandu, right? After Jiang Yan's post-battle speech, the fighting spirit of the Jiang clan was reignited. Chun-Shi was an outsider. Now that the crisis had been resolved, the Jiang clan was busy cleaning up the battlefield and rebuilding their home. I'll keep my word. Wushu looked up at the sky and threatened. However, he was so excited that he spat out another mouthful of blood. Do you think everything will be fine just because you've blocked the divine gate? At this moment, Wushu had reverted back to his crazy self. He was severely injured, but instead of healing himself, he sat on the iceberg and muttered to himself. Master once said, The soul mirror will be unsealed within 10 years. Let me calculate the time. 1 year in heaven, 8 years on earth. If that's the case, doesn't that mean I'll have to stay in the lower realm for a full year? Wait, doesn't that mean I'll lose 10 years of my life for nothing? No wonder no one wants to come to the lower realm. Yuan Tianzin. Oh, Yuan Tianzin, I'm going to lose big this time. You'll have to make it up to me when the time comes. Chapter 386. November 1st, Halloween in the West. Although many kindergartens were celebrating the Western Festival now, Donghua Gate Kindergarten did not promote the Western Festival in the park due to its pure bloodline. Therefore, for the children in the park, today was just a very ordinary day. The only thing worth noting was probably the temperature today, because winter had arrived in Shangjing again. This year's winter was slightly later than last year, but as soon as November passed, the trees on both sides of the street shed their leaves one after another. They held up the graceful branches of the dead trees as if they were welcoming the coming winter. The cold wind blew through the corner of the street and rolled up some leaves that had not been cleared. Perhaps because the kindergarten was next to the Forbidden City, it was particularly quiet here. In the alley, pedestrians hurriedly walked by in twos and threes, as if they did not want to stay in the cold wind for a moment longer. The road outside the kindergarten was already filled with cars that came to pick up children from school. The parents sat in the cars to keep warm, and the cars breathed out heavy air. Only Chun, she stood alone in front of the gate. He was wearing a black windbreaker, and he was standing like a javelin. At first glance, Chun-Shi looked a bit like a security guard in front of the sales department. Ding, 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 as the pleasant bell rang. The park that had been asleep for a long time became lively again. The children were chattering about going home, and the teacher had to let them line up. Then, class by class, they came to the gate to look for their parents. Chun-Shi's side suddenly became lively. The parents scrambled to the side of the gate, wishing that they could immediately pull their children out from behind the iron gate. Chun-Shi was not in a hurry, and Yin was not in a hurry either. This was because as soon as she walked out of the classroom, she saw Chun-Shi's figure as usual. Chun-Shi's figure, like a lighthouse on the sea. Even if life was like waves and tides, he would always wait there firmly, silently waiting for Yin to appear. Dad! 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 Yin stood on the steps, excitedly waving her small hands at Chun-Shi. The two brothers followed behind her, one on her left and one on her right. They looked like two incomparably loyal little guardians. The children of the older class had to walk last, so after most of the children had left with their parents, the three little fellows ran out of the school gate under the guidance of the teacher. As soon as she crossed the iron gate, Chun-Shi didn't even have time to hug her before the little girl very sensibly turned around and said to the teacher with a grin, "Goodbye, teacher. Bye, Yin and Wan, Ming. See you tomorrow. Good. See you tomorrow." Unknowingly, the two brothers had developed the habit of not wanting to go to school if they didn't see Yin. So now, the three children were all picked up by Chun-Shi. Gulao only needed to wait in the tea house. It was not that he was discriminating against ordinary kindergartens. It was just that the threshold for kindergarten teachers was too low. Naturally, there were good and bad teachers. Therefore, it was difficult for ordinary kindergarten's teachers to be as meticulous and patient as Donghua Gate Kindergarten. And this was the so-called professionalism. Under the patient guidance of the teachers, in addition to changing her accent, Yin's wild nature, which had been spoiled by Chun-Shi and his wife, gradually began to be restrained. In the beginning, under the guidance of Aunt Zhang, Yin was like a little girl in the mountains. At a young age, she knew that she had to share the burden of the family and never cause trouble for Aunt Zhang. Later, Chun-Shi and his wife came back, and the family of three was finally reunited. Yin also became a small-town girl born in a rich family. Just like the song said, "You only know how to look at the stars in the sky foolishly. You are so pure." The return of her parents allowed her to find the greatest happiness in the world, carefree and free. But it was also because of Chun-Shi's fatherly attitude of holding her in his hands and fearing that she would fall and melt in his mouth that Yin gradually let go of the nature of a child. She learned to be coquettish, naughty, shameless, and throw a tantrum. But it was also at this time that only then could he be considered a complete child. Later, Nian went to kindergarten, and it was a model kindergarten that was ranked in the country. Under the patient guidance of the teachers, Nian changed again. And at this moment, she truly became a lady from a wealthy family. However, there were too few people in this wealthy family. At most, it was a family of 3, plus his father-in-law and sister-in-law's family, of course, whether it was a mountain girl, a small-town girl, or a lady from a wealthy family. To Chun-Shi, Nian would always be the smart, sensible, lively, and cute Nian. He only wanted Nian to grow up happily, carefree, free, and unrestrained. No worries in the world should appear in Nian's young heart. In fact, Chun-Shi really wanted to tell her sometimes, no matter what happens in the future, even if the sky falls down, Nian, don't be afraid, don't be sad, and don't be sad. That's because I'll take care of you. Dad, the teacher gave us a little red flower today. Why? Because we're good at drawing. Oh, what about the painting? On the wall behind the classroom. The teacher said that at the next parent-teacher meeting, she will show our painting to you. Nian was wearing a pink down jacket today and a rabbit ear hat on her head. Coupled with her rosy cheeks, she looked extremely adorable. She sat in Chun-Shi's arms, and when she was excited, her little body couldn't help but gently twist. When Chun-Shi patted her back and motioned for her to sit down, she would immediately obediently hug Chun-Shi's neck and then coquettishly rub her head against Chun-Shi's head. The father and daughter whispered, and the brothers obediently followed behind them. In fact, the two of them had long been accustomed to this kind of life, so they didn't feel neglected. The two brothers were only a few months older than Nian, but under Gu Lao's constant education, the idea of giving in to your sister in everything was thoroughly planted in the depths of their hearts. Even the most common things in daily life, such as playing on the slide, the two brothers would let Nian play first, and then it would be their turn. This kind of feeling was also in line with the mood described by Li Bai in The Long Journey, riding a bamboo horse, circling the bed to play with green plums. Living together for thousands of miles, the two young people have no quarrel. Childhood sweethearts, childhood sweethearts. It was important to mention that childhood sweethearts had nothing to do with love, but it referred to the most innocent and pure friendship in the world. Children were still young, so naturally, it was impossible to speculate with adult thinking. But no matter what, humans were always social animals, and childhood without companions was incomplete. With the company of the two brothers, Nian's childhood would only be more fulfilling and happy. As for the future, that would be discussed in the future. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.